Good morning. My name is Laura Germino. I'm going to be moderating the fourth panel on the way forward. And it's a really exciting panel that I have to thank Ambassador Medina and Ruth and the OSCE for assembling and our hosts for enabling this to happen. It's people from NGOs and businesses, and the exciting thing is they all have very clearly the goal of reaching prevention of human trafficking while understanding and viewing it on a spectrum of labor rights violations, so not viewing it in isolation, but seeing that you have to attack it along with other labor rights. And they're going to be talking about both government regulations, voluntary initiatives, and possibly a third way, which is where you have voluntary initiatives, but where the compliance is actually not voluntary, where suppliers would actually have to comply. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. And by the way, today they gave me a bell for the time, but I don't think I'll have to use it. So, but we could keep it jolly this way. Our first speaker is John Morrison, Chief Executive, Institute for Human Rights and Business. Mr. Morrison is a leading practitioner and thinker on issues relating to the social responsibilities of government, business, and civil society. He is currently the Executive Director of the Institute for Human Rights and Business and has advised a number of governments, the European Union, OECD, and the United Nations on related issues. He has been working on trafficking issues for decades, since his 20s, and wrote a number of reports on smuggling and trafficking and its relationship with European asylum policy for the UNHCR and the British Refugee Council back in the late 1990s. So an expert who is untiring in his struggle to end human trafficking. I added that part to his bio.
Oh, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Good morning. Nice to be back. I'm going to give an example of a specific public-private partnership, which I think is the aim of this panel. I think we're all aware from the discussions yesterday and our other work that human trafficking sits in a complex web of economic, social, and political factors. There's a heck of a lot of complexity there. There's push factors, pull factors, and the exploitation, the criminality factors. And yet if we want to be successful, and then yesterday in some of my moderation, I was challenging us to be very clear about impact and outcome. If we want something that is going to be clearly impactful and that business, government, and civil society can come together around, we need simplicity. The problem is there's two types of simplicity. There's two ways of arriving from complexity to simplicity. There's one type of way which is very politically popular in some parts of the world at the moment, where you take complex problems and you find simplicity by ignoring the complexity. Or there's another way where you really work through the complexity for a long, long time to find those leverage points, those one or two things that if you made a difference here, you would have a positive outcome. And it's often very hard, honestly, to be sure that your simplistic interventions won't have adverse impacts or unintended consequences. So arriving at simplicity through complexity is one of the biggest challenges of the modern age, I would say. Also, collaborative approaches are not easy. Yesterday, I think we also had a discussion about whether we're talking about the role of business and government somehow merging around public-private partnerships. I would resist that fundamentally. I think I made the comment yesterday that government and non-governmental organisations are fundamentally different in the nature of the social contract they have with society. They exist for different reasons, different purposes, different motivations. However, that doesn't mean they can't come together in a particular public-private endeavour around a particular outcome. And I think the real strength of public-private partnerships is the diversity of the actors that come to the table. If we want business to behave like government and government to behave like business and civil society to behave like I don't know what, then we defeat the object of public-private partnerships. Public-private partnerships recognise the different skills, abilities, constituencies, motivations that each actor brings to the table. Therefore, clarity of purpose and mission and outcome is absolutely essential in relation to public-private partnerships. And I quoted Amina Mohammed yesterday, who's now Deputy General Secretary of the United Nations. When she oversaw the Sustainable Development Goals, she said to the UN General Assembly that the governance of the Sustainable Development Goals and public-private partnerships is unfinished business. Governance, accountability in relation to PPPs is fundamentally what I'm talking about, and that allows different actors with different motivations to come together. Perhaps unusual coalitions are the most effective. Yesterday also, the metaphor of 1,000 flowers blooming. It can be overwhelming how many initiatives there are on human trafficking. And there really is a fatigue for business, particularly, and other actors. I know many business leaders who are approached every week, literally every week, to come to a human trafficking conference or to join some public-private partnership or endeavour. And how we clearly cut through the flowers is one of our challenges. And I think we should judge initiatives by what they achieve concretely on the ground and not what they say they're going to achieve. Okay. So having said all that, my own work on human trafficking started in the 1990s. As Laura's kindly introduced, I think I wrote some of the first work on the way that asylum seekers were having to use smugglers and traffickers to reach European territory. My report for UNHCR was very controversial, but I think 20 years later, looking back, history has followed more or less the course that we predicted. It was also at the time of carriers' liability legislation. So back then, if you think about the role of business in relation to trafficking and migration, business was encouraged to perform the role of immigration officers. That's why airlines check your passports before you travel anywhere, because they are fined huge amounts of money if they bring undocumented or poorly documented migrants into another country. So we've already privatized. Governments over the past 20 years have taken big steps to privatize immigration and in a way push carriers, shipping companies, airlines, etc., into the role of anti-trafficking agents, if you like. Well, maybe not. Maybe this is part of the problem. Now, I want to go on to a particular issue, this issue of recruitment agencies. My own organisation, founded in 2009 by Mary Robinson, the former President of Ireland, works on a range of business and human rights issues. But I would say that the issue of recruitment agencies is the most widely spread business and human rights issue in the world. Why do I say that? Because I can't think of a single country on the planet where the issue of exploitation by third-party labour providers is not a real issue. Again, it's complex. Rob Lederer yesterday from EICC and his diagrams explained it very nicely, I think, the range of problems we have. What tends to happen is you will have an agent working in country of origin, often a poor country, could be anywhere in the world, many of the countries in South Asia or Southeast Asia. They will then get into a bidding war with the agents in country of destination. Maybe that's the Gulf, maybe it's Taiwan, maybe it's Malaysia, maybe it's somewhere else. Maybe it's here, maybe it's elsewhere in Europe. And the migrant that will get the job, before they've even left their village, is often the migrant who's willing to pay the most money. Now, this is illegal under ILO law. It's illegal in most parts of the world, but it happens in most parts of the world. So before the migrant even leaves the village in Bangladesh or Nepal or wherever, they can be indebted, their family can be indebted to the equivalent of 1 or 2 years' work. Land is mortgaged, houses are sold, etc. So we've created an economic system that fuels, in its worst case, human trafficking and forced labour. There are forms of human trafficking and forced labour that are hundreds of years old and have existed in agriculture, but this type is a response of the past 30 years and the way that global supply chains work. We've created a market for human trafficking and forced labour because we've commoditised labour. Labour is a commodity, like cotton, like sugar, like whatever, oil. Labour is now a commodity and it behaves on a supply and demand basis. So if we're to solve the labour exploitation issue that feeds human trafficking, we have to look at both supply and demand. We have to take an economic analysis to what is a human rights problem. Now, in 2012, my organisation launched in Bangladesh the Dhaka Principles for Migration with Dignity. Those 10 principles are based on UN ILO law. They are, if you like, a supply chain checklist for any global company, the 10 things you need to look for in your global supply chains to see if your workers, particularly migrant workers, but not just migrant workers, are exploited, particularly those that are provided through third-party labour providers. I can't think of a global supply chain anywhere that doesn't have third-party labour providers in it somewhere. I challenge anybody in the audience to talk about an international company that doesn't have this in their global supply chain. I've yet to find one. So we launched those, but over the past few years, and last year, we launched, and IOM mentioned this yesterday, the Leadership Platform on Responsible Recruitment, to focus on one of our principles, this issue of no worker fees, that the employer should bear the cost of recruitment. Would we expect our children to spend 2 years' salary to buy a job? Would we expect to sell our houses, sell our land, sell what assets we had to buy children jobs? We would not expect that. Yet every day, millions of workers around the world have to do that to participate in the global economy. So we think that we can abolish this issue of worker fees within the next 10 years. If everybody works together, if UN agencies, governments, trade unions, global brands, civil societies work on this, we can eradicate worker fees to these agents by 2026. And last year, with a group of international companies, UN agencies, NGOs and others, we launched this platform. And I'm very pleased to say we work closely with a number of organisations you heard yesterday, like EICC and the Consumer Goods Forum. It's very complex, though. It's not as simple as audit in supply chains, questionnaires for suppliers around labour. We know there's such strong incentives in the labour market, such strong kickbacks, that even suppliers don't know what's going on, or they will hide what's going on. The level of criminality in some countries amongst these labour agencies means some suppliers are even scared of cutting out the labour providers because some of them have criminal connections in some parts of the world. We need law enforcement. We need the police. We need labour inspectors. We need business people to feel secure that they can move to another economic model. And as Rob said yesterday, the best solution is to not use these agencies at all, is direct hire. But we know that the way the global marketplace works at the moment, that isn't going to be achievable in many contexts. So if we can't go to direct hire, we also then have to work on the supply side of the equation. At the moment, and Didier said for the past 20 years, we've been talking about this and we've yet to be successful. One reason for that is we've just tackled the demand side of the economic equation. What is yet the case is that there's not adequate supply of ethical recruitment agencies in the world that can provide labour without retaining passports, without making the workers pay fees up front. So we need, and this is where the IOM IRIS programme is very much part of the mix, to create a database of agencies who are committed to move to a new economic model without kickbacks, double taking, etc. We need to work on supply and demand together. And I think if we do, by 2026, possibly, we will have eradicated an economic model which exploits millions of people every day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. I had one question. Is there an example of a corporation that has moved towards direct hire and then been, say, converted to that, that has actually, not maybe fully, but moved more towards that?
Yes, I think there are quite a few examples. And if my colleagues were sitting on the stage, they would rattle them off. I take the example of Vinci, the French construction company. So we have colleagues based in Qatar, as you know. And there, Vinci actually went back to they went to Bangladesh and Nepal to visit these agents. And I think they then moved to a direct hire model. That's what I'm told. So I think for some companies it is possible to, some companies have not used these agents consistently in some parts of the world, have tried to operate a direct hire model. But as I said, I don't know of a company who globally isn't using labour agencies somewhere, or their suppliers are not using it somewhere. So, as Rob said yesterday, unfortunately, the way that suppliers work, and often having to meet high demands at peak times of the year. Sometimes it's the buyer, it's the brand themselves, the way they manage their supply chains, the demands they put on suppliers, short-term demands, force suppliers into using extra labour quickly. But I think that's a bad excuse. I think when we really look at this in countries of origin, there is an economic model here that's based on a scheme of kickbacks between agencies in countries of origin and country and destination, where a lot of people are making a lot of money. They're not all criminals, but at the bottom end of that market are human traffickers. It's a continuum, yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm glad there are some companies converting, because sometimes people convert after the fact when they see the benefits. They realize. Okay, we're going to move on to the next speaker. Irena Konechna is a PhD, independent expert and consultant, member of International La Strada Association, a leading European NGO network working to ensure a world without trafficking in human beings by promoting respect for human rights. In 2015, she was awarded a Fulbright scholarship and did her research in the United States at a non-governmental organization, Polaris, which used to be called Polaris Project. From 2008 to 2014, she was a national coordinator and director of La Strada, Czech Republic.
Thank you very much. I will stand here because I'm somehow hidden behind the table. Thank you very much to OSCE and the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs for inviting La Strada International. I will try to speak about our network, what we are doing related to partnering with the private sector. I do represent La Strada International, which associates currently 29 non-governmental organizations and partners across Europe, a network which is preventing, and its members are primarily working on prevention of human trafficking and direct assistance at grassroots national levels, meaning that the La Strada International Secretariat works bottom up, means that we are receiving informations from grassroots level from our members, and we are working with the informations by doing research, monitoring, data collection, and advocating at the international level, trying to channel the grassroots problems and issues at the international level. We are also providing capacity building to our partners and to our members, and we are trying to promote victims' rights, or we call rather trafficked persons' rights, because we do not like the expression victims, because it's not enough empowering. Few years ago, our members started to call for bigger engagement with private sector. It was based on their experience with increasing cases of labor trafficking or inhuman treatment of workers, deceptive practices of private sector, and I would say that not all the cases were recognized as trafficking cases by law enforcement authorities. And somehow our members started to be frustrated, like on what to do, because there are cases of labor trafficking in their view, however not recognized by the law enforcement, and there was increasing need to engage and to create awareness among private sector on labor trafficking, labor exploitation, and issues they deal on daily basis with. So this was the motivation, and this was also the reason why we created a campaign used in Europe, which you can see here on the websites. It's a website usedineeurope.org, and you can find different cases of labor trafficking across Europe. In the different sectors, like lorry drivers in Germany, cleaning sector in Denmark, mushroom pickers in Netherlands, or asparagus workers in Czech Republic. So you can find variety of cases of labor trafficking. Not all of them were necessarily prosecuted as labor trafficking cases, but in our view they were very strong indicators of labor trafficking. So this campaign was created in order to make more awareness about labor trafficking in Europe. Furthermore, of course, there was also, and I have to say, increasing need not only to work together with private sector on prevention, but also to receive somehow alternative funding for different prevention campaigns from alternative sources. So this was also quite a big motivation, and we started to solve different, let's say, ethical issues while we will receive funding from private sector, and what if the private sector would be found liable for some misconduct in some field. So these issues we started to solve and started to research a bit. Then we initiated a project focused on private sector partnership together with Dutch NGO SOMO, which is the Center for Research on Multinational Corporations. I believe they do really great work. They do research in multinational corporations, focusing on different sides of their impact, including environmental or tax justice. And their approach is that they are doing scientific research, so no campaigning, no shaming, naming, but they are really approaching them very academically, which we liked, and we together cooperated to introduce somehow some methods and some approaches to private sectors to our members. And as a result of this project, there is a resource guide for NGOs. This resource guide is targeting NGOs who would like to engage with private sector. It describes what are actually the commitments of private sectors, how practically can NGOs start to approach private sector. And this is publicly available on the websites of La Strada International for NGOs. And I highly recommend NGOs to study this guide. However, the goal of the project was to understand the sector where HR has other meaning that we are used to. And also to understand that private sector has also certain obligations. We have also learned that business of business is actually business, not charity, surprisingly. But also we learned that business of some business is increasingly responsible business, which gave us kind of hope that we can start to initiate feasible and tangible partnership with business. And also we learned that reputation matters, and that reputation is important for business. Our members, more or less, do initiate partnership at their national levels. However, it's not so easy as it sounds at the conferences. And we learned that the initiatives of business are driven up bottom, meaning that the headquarters level, usually they are some initiatives. However, when it comes to the regional branches, usually they are lacking resources, lacking knowledge, and it's difficult. Similarly, our members are lacking resources to initiate some tangible partnerships, and it's slowly, increasingly going to be more and more developed, and we already have some experience. For instance, our partners and members in Bulgaria, they are already partnering with a Manpower, which is one of the biggest employment agency, which internationally committed themselves to work against labor trafficking and forced labor. In the Czech Republic, La Strada actually developed a partnership with Philip Morris, and slowly we are trying to work with the regional branches of the multinational corporations, but not only with the multinational, but also with the national companies as such. Yeah. But I would like to say it's not significant only for the private sector that at the international level you see the commitments, you see the guiding principles, and that the regional and local branches of the corporations rather lack the knowledge, but it's similar with trade unions as well. I would like to put the linkage, because at the level of International Trade Unions Confederation you see also commitments, but however when it comes to the very, very local level and you speak with some trade unionists, they usually recognize migrant workers as those who are spoiling labor market. So it's very similar, and I don't want to say that it's something specific for private sector as such. Now I would like to say something what NGOs can do to work with private sector. There are many strategies to counter harmful practices. okay, harmful practices of companies against people or the environment. Civil society organizations may try to influence companies through engagement and dialogue with companies. Alternatively, civil society organizations can take more confrontation approach through initiating court cases, filing a complaint with grievance mechanism, and public awareness raising and shareholder actions. Civil society organizations and activist groups also use direct actions tactics like demonstrations or strike to pressure companies and claim rights. Now, in the end, I would like to say that La Strada International is more than ready to work with business. We can work together on prevention and awareness. We can help to train and inform staff and raise more awareness among personnel on the issue of forced labor and human trafficking. Active companies can also help to engage other businesses to clean sector and supply chain and promote fair working conditions. Now, I would like to say also that La Strada International supported PICUM's work. PICUM is the platform on international cooperation on undocumented migrants in Europe, and their work on guidelines for developing effective complaint mechanisms in cases of labor exploitation and abuse, in particular also for undocumented workers. So we supported this initiative. Currently, we are working in Romania, Bulgaria, and Poland on trafficking cases and with NGOs working on migrant rights. And from October, we are going to start 2 years project supported by the European Commission, which will be about the access to compensation, because this is some initiative for, which is taken by La Strada as its own 4 years, and access of compensation we see as one of the very important aspects of the fight against human trafficking. And within this project, we are planning to analyze successful as well as unsuccessful cases of compensation. We are planning to research more the referral mechanisms, not only national but also transnational, regarding compensation claims, not only identified persons but also related to compensation cases, and what are the systematic obstacles, because we know that legislation has been introduced, however the implementation is still somehow struggling. I would like to thank you for your attention. If you would need some more information, do not hesitate to contact me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Irina. I'm hoping during the question and answer that you can, I'd love to hear I would love to hear an example of either a positive or negative outcome from the Made in Europe awareness campaign, like a law enforcement prosecution or a consumer campaign, but we can hold it for the questions afterwards.
Okay.
So the next presenter, Mercia Silva, and she's our colleague who has come a long way to be with us, right? A journey of many days. Mercia Silva is Executive Director of the National Pact Institute for the Eradication of Forced Labor, Impacto, Brazil. Mercia is currently the Executive Coordinator of Impacto, the entity responsible of the National Pact to Eradicate Slavery, that involves the private sector at the public and private agenda to eradicate slavery at the supply chain. She worked for more than 15 years as program coordinator and researcher on programs designed to monitor labor rights, sustainability, and environmental issues in national and multinational companies in Brazil. From 2006 to 2007 at the University of Maryland, she was a Fulbright Scholar in the exchange program Hubert Humphrey Fellow at the U.S. State Department.
Good morning. Everybody raise your right hand. Don't let your cell phone go down. Oh, everybody's awake. Thank you. My English is not that good, so please help me to understand and make myself understandable. So, like they say, I am from the National Pact to Eradicate Slavery in Brazil. The pact was launched 12 years ago. So this movement in Europe, all this conversation with companies, we started a long time ago. So I have to bring a little of our Brazilian context so you can understand a little why we start earlier to do this. You can go. So in 1995, the Brazilian government, for the first time, assuming his responsibility and the issue of slavery in Brazil. Until there, they are denying from the United Nations report and say that everything was okay. But we know that that time we have a military dictatorship, so there is no complaint in dictatorships. It's all fine, right? So in 1995, when we start our democratic process, the president recognized that we have this problem. Also, he recognized that we have a discrimination problem against black people. So it's something that starts in that moment. After that, when we make it public that we have a problem to face, you start to make a public policy about that. You have to face the problem. So they create this inspection mobile group. Brazil is a huge country. So if an inspector goes to a farm nearby of his home, perhaps he can have his family at risk, or his own life could be at risk. So the inspections goes from different parts of Brazil, do the inspection, the free of people that is on slavery, and go back home. So the farms or the company don't know from where these people come from. So they are public employers doing that. Only the government has the exclusivity to do this kind of inspections. So in 2003, the government create a kind of public name and a shame list. So they call the dirty list. Is a list that the companies or person that was inspected and convicted as using slavery, they are publicized in that list. So it's important to have that list to make a differentiation between who is doing well and who is not doing well in the business meaning. But making the dirty list was not really impacting the economical deal or the commercial relationship or the exchange and contracts. So they decided to invite the private sector. The ILO started this conversation with the private sector in Brazil, invite some NGO, like a Social Observatory that worked with Soma for a long time, Ethos Institute, the Repórter Brasil, that is more famous organization, and also ILO. They create a committee. And from there to 2013, this committee was dealing with the list of who is part of the Impacto. So this national pacto was like 400 big companies. And they decided that it was too big to become just a program or a project, and they created an institute to take care of the Impacto. Before I go to this institute, I want to talk a little about the Brazilian understanding about slavery, because it's a kind of different from ILO. It's not different in the way that everybody sees slavery, but because it's part of our national penal code or legislation, makes Brazil a kind of different also, because ILO convention take care about two conditions to be a slave: isolation or debt bondage, or really forced labor. We included two more pillars: exhausting hours and degrading working. You can go to the next. So our concept of slavery, it's holding these four pillars. And of course, people want to change that. That is our political fight scenario right now. You can go. I want to show some pictures, just to make sure that it's not a kind of subjective approach. Those pictures come from the inspections, the labor force inspection, and they share these pictures to show that it's very clear. about conditions and work conditions and exhausting hours. This is a place that the laborers used to sleep on the field of sugarcane, soya, or cattle. This is a textile sector, a garment, where sometimes kids are living there, children. This is the place to drink and have a shower and cook. And the point of exhausting hours, it's not about the timing working. It's the kind of working that we are doing. We can spend like 2 days, 24 hours or 48 hours working to organize this meeting. It's different of doing this kind of work, please. 12 hours doing this work, or sugarcane, or carnaúba, or even children work from this kind of work for a long time. So that are our conception, and we have companies that agree with that, and of course we have some part of the business community that hate this kind of concept because they make money with that. So I go to talking a little about Impacto. Impact has these main goals to involve companies, to bring them together to sign or to agree with 10 commitments. And we mobilize all the companies in supply chain to work with, because we know that it's not possible to face this kind of problem alone. So we have this sectorial approach. We raise information about the risks in some sectors. We encourage creation of a specific action plan, and also to communicate the actions, because some companies don't want their brand and in the same sentence of slavery, even if it's doing good. So it's a kind of things that we have to overcome to bring companies involved. And we do this multi-stakeholder approach. So Impacto is part of the National Committee to Eradicate Slavery, when we sit with civil society, other business organization, and government, and judiciary system. Everybody sits in the same table once a month to debate about the new field that has a problem, or how to deal with the national plan. Again, another, please. Sorry. We already had a lot of sectorial agreements and supply chain mapping. Also, many of my time is doing advocacy in Brasilia, or capital city, with our politicians. We do monitoring the system of bringing sectorial reports to the companies, so the companies can have at least an understanding about their achievement related to the other companies in the same sector or region. We do seminars, debates, and we publish materials all in Portuguese. I have to do in English so everybody can read our stuff. And we do like working group inside of Impacto, when we try to talking about one specific new sector to bring in conversation. And also we help companies create their own action plan, because this is specific. It depends on the region, depends on the sector, or the raw material they are working on. Again, another. Just to have a view about the agreements that the company used to sign when they became member of Impacto. First one is to recognize or legitimate the dirty list, applying, using that, and talking about to their supply chain. Also, many of our commitments is related with make working conditions better to employ from their employer and their supply chain, and for sure communicate everything they are doing and reports on their official documents and websites. Again, another one. For us, the most important things is our annual monitoring process. I send a questionnaire to the companies and ask them to say what they are doing for each of the 10 commitments. It's a very long questionnaire. We want to do more questionnaires through the years with specific issues. But this report comes to us, and then we make this sectorial or totally or general information about their actions. And that information comes back to the company for each one. They have the individual report, so they can help, they can do the next action plan based on their achievements. Okay, go. And one more. Those are some companies that are in Impacto. These are in our website, so you can ask in after. This is a kind of supply chain mapping risk that we do. We take the dirty list, you see 2 farms over there with the red, and then we follow their commercial links to the big companies, and then the big companies start to doing some kind of commercial restrictions or call for conversation with them. Again? Okay, that everybody knows. And for us, it's important to understand the UK case and the study they do about how the business community understands their supply chain. In their report, they say that many of them have no clue about their supply chain ties. Okay, one more. And these are our institutional supporters, so the companies that really support Impacto existence. I will stop from here, and then I hope you can have more questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcia, for your concrete list of companies that are involved in working with you. And during question and answer, it would be nice to hear about how, say, if a company has read the dirty list that the government has issued, what steps they've taken to mitigate risks. If we can, hope we can discuss that at the end of the other speakers. So our next speaker, Samir Goswami, Senior Advisor, United Way Worldwide, Center on Human Trafficking and Slavery. Mr. Goswami is a senior advisor to the United Way Worldwide, where he helps the center engage multinational corporations on counter-trafficking initiatives. He also consults with Mobile Accord Incorporated and Isara Institute on developing technology solutions that assist companies in identifying labor and human rights issues in their supply chains. He was also Director of Government Professional Solutions at LexisNexis and managed a portfolio of U.S. government contracts with the Agency for International Development, State Department, and others. Previously, Samir co-founded his own nonprofit organization in Illinois, where he organized survivors and led coalitions that transformed the state of Illinois' response to human trafficking.
Thank you. I hope these introductions don't count towards our 7 minutes that we have here.
No, no.
Well, thank you to the OSC for the invitation, and thank you for hosting this wonderful dialogue. It's been especially welcoming to me from the States to learn from some different perspectives and meet some different folks, particularly on this region. As was mentioned, I am a senior advisor to United Way Worldwide in Washington, D.C., to the Human Trafficking and Slavery Center. The United Way Worldwide convenes businesses around these issues to share best practices. We also leverage our footprint of 200+ United Way Worldwides throughout the country to offer services and advocacy to victims and survivors of human trafficking. A huge challenge to concerned brands around the world is knowing exactly which of the thousands of farms or factories and plants and others could be exploiting workers. Their first-tier suppliers are well known. However, the ones behind them, the hundreds of farms and others behind those first tiers, are not. This puts many of these multinational companies and by extent, us consumers, at grave risk of supporting exploitation. The question is then, what do we do about it? Well, first we have to find out about it, which can also be a complicated endeavor, as we've heard many speakers talk about. You could send someone down to a facility with a clipboard to ask questions of a worker in different areas. You could ask your suppliers to give you information about what they think they're doing in terms of how they're treating their employees, if you know where the suppliers are. Or you could also count on auditors and audits, and we've heard a couple times this last couple days that audits also have their own shortcomings. That said, what we've realized is, and many companies themselves have realized this, who better to tell us about how workers are being treated in their supply chains than the workers themselves, the workers who are working in fishing vessels and mines and factories and farms, et cetera. But workers are all over the world, as we've seen for the ILO that there are at least 21 million or so exploited workers, victims of forced labor. So they're all over the world in very harsh treated areas. How do you get to these millions of workers or even a representative sample of these workers? In the past few years, we've seen, and this is what I'm going to focus on today, is we've seen that there's some entrepreneurs who have used very creative technology-based tools developed to capture what we call workers' voice, to capture the experiences of workers through the technology that they themselves have access to. We've seen experts, including some of the companies that I've worked for, large mine data sets, usually by pulling information from thousands of public sources, such as news reports, NGO reports, court filings, and other information that could tie or implicate a certain supplier with certain conduct. We've seen the establishment of hotlines, so workers can call in a hotline or a grievance hotline and talk about or complain about the conditions they're facing. We've also seen a couple of Yelp-like applications, so smartphone applications like TripAdvisor or Yelp, where workers can themselves report on how they were treated by an employer or recruiter or an employment agency and share that with other workers who are also making the decision of which recruiter to go with to access for a job. And as we've seen that the penetration of mobile phones and smartphones has greatly increased around the world, we've seen the utilization of SMS and other mobile-based tools to poll and survey these workers directly to ask them how they're being treated by their employers. Generally, depending on the product, these data are then aggregated, they're analyzed, and they're provided to a supply chain manager through a customized dashboard, a report, or a data feed. Thus, the product developers, what the aim is to really operationalize the input of worker voice as a factor in supply chain decision-making. Now, most supply chain managers, regardless of how large or small the supply chain that they're managing is, have access to or try to access to multiple data sets about their suppliers to gauge various points of risk. What these product developers are saying is labor rights, human rights, should also be a consideration in that decision-making. And if we can provide that data cheaper and easier to the supply chain managers, maybe they'll act upon it, and maybe they'll hold that supplier accountable to those workers' experiences. I'll give you a couple of examples of groups that we've worked with as well. For example, there's been much reported on labor abuses in Thailand's seafood industry, a majority of which heads to Western consumers. The migrant workers from Laos, Cambodia, and Myanmar are often cheated during recruitment. They're abused out at sea in fishing boats or even while in processing plants back at port. To address this, the ISRA Institute, which is a small Thailand-based nonprofit that has a pretty small budget and a few staff, they partner with 14 leading brands who are concerned about this issue because of a lot of the reporting that's come out of NGOs and others about this issue. The interesting thing is the tools that ISRA uses with its limited staff to get to all the potential victims. The Thai government themselves estimate that there are about 300,000 or so workers in the Thai seafood industry. ISRA estimates that maybe up to 30% or so, around 30%, could be victims of forced labor within that population, and many, many more are their rights as laborers, as workers, are violated on a daily basis. It's simply not possible to interview or interact with all of these workers if it weren't for technology. However, over 90% of at least the Burmese migrant workforce in the Thai seafood industry does have access to smartphones. It's a really high penetration of smartphone uses. And thus, with the support of the Walmart Foundation and the U.S. Agency for International Development, speaking of public-private partnerships, ISRA was able to develop and launch a Burmese language app called Golden Dreams that these workers have been able to download and report on how they're being treated by employers and fishing boat captains, et cetera, et cetera. ISRA also runs a 24-hour hotline in multiple languages, and they also leverage other social media applications like Facebook and Viber and others to connect with the workers. Through these technology-enabled platforms, ISRA estimates, its small team, has access to about 60,000 workers in the seafood industry. Staff then are able to take the data that they glean from these sources and, if needed, verify them in person and then share that data with the brands, who can then work with their suppliers, either put pressure on them or work with them to rectify the solutions that the workers themselves are talking about. So think about that. The small team in a small nonprofit in Thailand has been able to show some progress in a very large issue using technology. And I don't want to say that it's technology that's made the difference. It's the political will of the brands that have been able to leverage the technology to help make the changes as well. The other example I want to give you is is a group that uses mobile technology to survey workers. As I mentioned, the prevalence of mobile technologies has made it easier and cheaper to survey workers. For example, another company called Geopol, they partner with mobile network operators in about 45 different countries to access and survey people about a variety of issues, including how they are treated at work. These partnerships with the mobile network operators gives Geopol access to about 320 million mobile users around the world. Last year, they served hundreds of workers in the DRC and Tanzania. They sent out an SMS to residents of specific regions where minors live in the DRC and Tanzania. Those who qualified and opted in told Geopol about the health and safety violations. They texted about the lack of safety equipment as well as the presence of the worst forms of child labor in the mines. Many said that they needed improved health care. They needed access to schools for the kids, and they also, one of their primary demands was better wages for the parents. The children would not have to work. What was telling to me was that most of these workers knew that they had a local mining laws that regulated their rights, that guaranteed them certain rights, but they also knew that those laws were not being enforced. So that was one of their number one asks, was the enforcement of those laws. Geopol provides this data to both impacted companies as well as governments to let them know exactly what was said in from what mines by these workers themselves, therefore having these workers' voices impact some of the supply chain decisions. Unfortunately, what we found is that multinational companies who face many such risks have not quite adopted such solutions at an enterprise level. And the examples I provided have been in partnership with some multinational companies. However, we've seen that despite the lower costs, conducting systematic due diligence for trafficking does not appear to have become part of standard operating procedure and is often relegated to separate limited corporate responsibility or ethical sourcing departments. We see a lot of pilot projects out there, and I think it's time that we all agree that we have shown that these pilots work, and now they just need to be expanded into regular sourcing departments and not just a side function of ethical sourcing. Ethical sourcing is sourcing, period. Brands should fully incorporate such tools for diligence into their functions, and their investment will spur further innovation. Technology is changing every day. We have more and more abilities, more and more cheaper abilities to get to workers and ask them how they're being treated. A couple of blunt recommendations for governments as well. Governments have been actually a very key player in funding some of the development of these tools. When corporates may have been shy to make initial investment, governments have jumped in. As I mentioned earlier, ISRO's Golden Dream app was in part funded by the U.S. Agency for International Development. But I think, governments need to pass laws that don't just drive corporate disclosure on how they may or may not be monitoring their supply chains. We have to pass laws that compel companies to act. The more companies feel like they need to take these issues seriously, the more they will act and take them seriously. And we have plenty of examples to show how to do so. Governments should also use these tools to monitor their own supply chains. Local and federal governments procure stuff. Many, like the US, have good intentions in their purchasing regulations, but like the private sector, monitoring of their suppliers beyond the first tier is often very limited and very lacking. Finally, I think it can be cost prohibitive for labor ministries or departments to hire multiple inspectors to go to every farm, to go to every plantation, every mine, et cetera, and every port to ask workers questions. Governments themselves can use these tools to directly access those who work in their jurisdictions. This data can then just be used to monitor their own supply chains, but also to enforce their own laws, or at least to augment some of the in-person data collection that's required. They should also publish this data, use these tools, publish this data so that companies can use it to hold their suppliers accountable, and civil society can also use it to hold suppliers accountable. A final thought is many of us first approached this a few years ago as an information challenge, an information gap. We thought that if we could just provide this actionable data to supply chain managers and to governments, then they'll act upon it. There are some examples of this happening, but there are many more examples of this not happening. So while there are some very exciting tools that have helped us capture workers' voice, we still need to do a lot more to use the data that's collected to show the workers that these are not just empty questions that are asking that go into some file. Their voices are important and they should be part of a supply chain decision. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samir. And I'm hoping that during discussion, I'd love to hear about if there are mechanisms against retaliation when workers report complaints, and if there's a way to impose a sanction on a supplier who does retaliate. And also just whether it's political will of the brands that they've come on through consumer pressure or through just intrinsic desire to do so. And then we have, last but definitely not least, Alexis Delaroff, Chief Operating Officer, Accor Hotels Russia, Georgia, and the CIS, General Director for Russian Management Hotel Company. Under his management, Accor Hotels has risen from 3 hotels in 2005 to 43 operating hotels throughout the region in Russia, Georgia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Armenia. Accor Hotels has a portfolio of over 50 projects to be opened within the next years.
Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm business. I'm almost the bad guy, from what I heard. Who's coming from the business here? Wow. So, it would be interesting to bring at some point some more business, because I think we're not doing so bad overall. So let me tell you about what we're doing at Accor on one very specific thing which is related to THB, and this is child exploitation. Accor Hotel, I need to put my glasses on. Accor Hotel was the first hotel chain in 2001 to join and sign with EPCAT an agreement in order to train and give our teams and customers a feeling on what is child exploitation. And this was once again back in 2001. Yeah, it's working. So these are statistics that you probably know that are related to child trafficking. Actually, I'm here not because it's a main issue in Russia and CIS. I'm here, by the way, to represent a speaker from the head office who is in charge of the corporate social responsibility for Accor, who couldn't do it. So my presentation is also related to Russia because this is where I'm working for the past 20 years. But this is also related, of course, to Accor. As I told you, in 2001, we joined EPCAT against child tourism. And most important, in 2014, we reinforced our commitment with a new program name, which is called WATCH. And WATCH is for We Act Together for Children. And curiously, I mean, this is almost an anecdote. This slogan, this name was invented in Russia. And it's a very strong name, and it's directly to the spirit of it. And on top of that, Accor has included this commitment in our ethics charter, which is signed and published by the CEO of Accor. So it's a very strong commitment all over the network. And of course, we're working in 95 countries. But when you look at this slide, it does concern all the countries, and not only Europe, not only Southeast Asia. We see this in America, in South America. So it's a real challenge all over the world. What are the objectives? Our objective is to have 100% of our hotels employee trained by the next couple of years. Training is done on site, is done with EPCAT that is coming on site. Thank you. It's better to give me vodka at this stage because I'm nervous. So it's done on-site in each hotel, and each employee has to attend these trainings. The feedback of the employees is very various. I mean, most of them do not understand why we're doing this. I can tell you that I did not understand either until I was personally confronted with that in one of the hotels. And at this time, I didn't have the training, and I just threw the guest out of the hotel, kicking his ass. And I didn't realize that there is a whole procedure behind that. And when you're confronted to that, and then you start thinking on yes, it's also happening in the place where you're working. It was in Europe. It was actually in Moscow. So yes, all the employees are trained, and we're delivering leaflets in the rooms so that not only the employees are trained, but also the customers are made aware of the problem and of the fact that this hotel and this hotel chain has a commitment, and our employees are trained, and this goes from the receptionist to the housekeeper, to the managers, because this is happening, of course, at the reception, in the rooms, in a restaurant, in the leisure areas, everywhere. This can happen everywhere in a hotel. And this is exactly what I'm saying here. Oops. This can happen. You cannot see anything. I couldn't see anything either. This is happening at the reception, of course, when we always now asking for IDs when we have a suspicious situation of an adult coming with a child. I mean, this is done actually in airlines, as someone mentioned here, and this is normal procedure now implemented in all our hotels. This can happen in the corridors of the hotels, and this is why our housekeeping staff is trained. I mean, for sure it's happening in the rooms, you can understand. But this can happen also next to the pool or in the beach, when an adult can sit next to someone younger who doesn't seem to be his child, and our leisure staff is trained in order to look at that. And finally, this is happening in leisure time. I mean, there's a party in the hotel, conference, whatever, and then you're going. There's a party, and the people are going up in the rooms, maybe not alone, with people a little bit more younger. And here also we're training our food and beverage staff, because this happens also in a restaurant, in order to at least put attention and inform management, security, or whoever in charge in each hotel. It's a different story, in order to assess the situation at least. You see the staff feedback. Most of them do not understand until they are faced with the situation, and we're all parents. We all have children, most of us. So it's something that is close to the heart of the people at the end of the day. The feedback from our guests also is different, and here I'm talking about my region, which I can state. A lot of and 65% of our customers in the region are local people. I mean, in Kazakhstan, from Kazakhstan, in Armenia, from Armenia, in Russia, from Russia. And most of them, I mean, do not understand why we're doing this, because they think they are not concerned by that. But you never know. At least they know that we know, which does not refrain the violators to go to other hotels, by the way. This is good that we're doing this, but this is displacing the problem in reality. And yes, one last thing. It takes more or less 6 months to fully train the staff of the hotel, because there are procedures, there are leaflets, so it takes more or less 6 months to do. As you've seen, 85% of all our hotels have been trained worldwide. We're at 75% in this region because we're opening hotels like every 6-10 hotels per year. So it requires a lot of involvement from the management, from the team, from EPCAT, which is helping us to achieve this. But this is a strong tool. And this is part of our commitment. We all big companies has a CSR program, and this is one of the biggest part of our program in terms of fighting the human trafficking. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Alexis, for this invaluable contribution from business, because of course, as you pointed out, it's absolutely essential to have, on the business side, corporate partners who are genuinely dedicated to eradicating the problem. And I hope during the discussion, I think we'd love to hear more about how people who thought there was not a problem, it's sort of like once you, it's like when you have a radio and you're tuning and you haven't found the station, and once you find that station, you know where it is. In other words, once you are aware of the problem, all of a sudden you see it when you didn't, and the evolution of your employees. And we may also, I hope, have a chance to hear about how you feel about direct hire, which was mentioned by other panelists, in terms of contractors in your supply chain, because you've taken on this enormous problem, and then there may be other aspects that open up for you as a business. And now I'm hoping we can open the floor to questions, and I know that we need to thank definitely our rapporteur, Veneta. Can you pronounce your last name for me correctly? Poletside, and she's absolutely has a lot to report back, and I hope she has more after your excellent questions that are forthcoming. Go ahead.
Да, наверное, вот так. Добрый день. Вчера госпожа Пойнман была очень любезна, представив меня аудитории, но для тех, кто не был вчера, я напомню, меня зовут Вера Грачева. Я имела честь 10 лет работать в бюро специального представителя по борьбе с торговлей людьми в ОБСЕ, а в целом занимаюсь этой проблемой примерно 17 лет, так что я имела шанс наблюдать, как эволюционировала позиция государств, бизнеса, гражданского общества по отношению к торговле людьми. И в связи с этим у меня есть одно дополнение и одна рекомендация. Дополнение касается вопроса, который был поднят вчера моим коллегой, о взаимосвязи между интернетом и его использованием в торговле людьми, преступниками, и в то же время возможностями, которые предоставляет интернет для противодействия торговле людьми. И я бы хотела напомнить, что эта тема не нами первыми поднималась, она уже давно разрабатывалась, хотя все равно есть определенный дефицит информации, дефицит исследований. Одна из работ была опубликована в рамках инициативы, которая называлась UN Gift. Вы, наверное, помните, была такая вот в рамках ООН глобальная инициатива по противодействию торговле людьми. Работа называлась «Технологии и торговля людьми». Затем было исследование Совета Европы, интернет, сейчас я точно вам скажу, это называлось «Торговля людьми, рекрутинг через интернет». Затем были статьи, которые опубликованы были в профессиональных журналах, например, в журнале Американской ассоциации юристов «Торговля людьми и интернет и другие технологии», в работах других исследователей, например, Ребекки Седвик, «7 путей технологии, по которым технология может использоваться в борьбе с торговлей людьми» и так далее. Но проблема достаточно новая, и нам нужно всем уделять очень большое внимание, потому что мы, безусловно, отстаем от преступников. Мы отстаем в использовании интернета для повышения осведомленности. Мы отстаем в том, что называется outreach, в донесении информации до уязвимых групп населения, в пропаганде тех наилучших практик, которые делаются через интернет. То есть это мощнейшее оружие, которое должно быть нами взято всеми на вооружение. А рекомендация, которую я бы хотела высказать, поскольку организаторы воодушевили нас на то, чтобы мы все разрабатывали рекомендации, она связана со следующим. Вчера один из участников конференции задал мне вопрос, поставивший меня несколько в тупик. Он спросил, а почему бы ОБСЕ не разработать свод неких рекомендаций относительно того, как надо противодействовать торговле людьми? Я надеюсь, что многие участники знают, что ОБСЕ разрабатывает такие рекомендации и политические обязательства, начиная с 2000 года. Они все существуют, они исключительно продвинутые и тщательно разработанные. Но, как показывает практика, очень мало кто об этом знает. Они адресованы и государственным структурам, и законодателям, и парламентариям, и правоохранительным органам, и бизнесу, и средствам массовой информации, и социальным работникам, миграционным работникам, практически всем структурам, которые так или иначе соприкасаются с данной темой. Они принимаются очень тяжело, разрабатываются очень тщательно, а дальше они остаются в поле зрения очень маленького круга лиц. И моя рекомендация сводится к следующему. Почему бы не использовать возможности ОБСЕ и Бюро спецпредставителей для того, чтобы как можно больше популяризировать эти обязательства? Я понимаю, это огромный массив, это там 36 страниц чистого текста, но их можно ведь разбить на темы, допустим, рекомендации для частного сектора, рекомендации для средств массовой информации, рекомендации для социальных работников. И эти рекомендации могут быть объяснены, почему они согласованы и приняты. Что будет, если их не выполнять? Какие существуют наиболее успешные практики по их выполнению в разных странах? И публиковать маленькие буклеты. Я понимаю, что такой вот труд, как комментарий к плану действия ОБСЕ, который распространялся вчера, там больше сотни страниц, мало кто будет читать это, только для специалистов. Но если это будет маленькая брошюра, адресно направленная на группу специалистов, на языке, доступном для этих специалистов, допустим, на русском языке можно издавать такие буклеты для стран СНГ, я думаю, что это будет иметь все-таки свой эффект, потому что очень часто мы не знаем то, что уже написано и рекомендовано. Спасибо большое.
Thank you. I appreciate your question. If anyone on the panel has a comment relating to that topic, it may also be of a broader comment for the general conference overall, but if anyone would like to address that point.
We'll have time.
I want to be sure we have leave time for more questions. So if you want to hold your comment, we can move on to other questions. Okay.
Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. Я представляю организацию договора коллективной безопасности ОДКБ Нурулин Олег. У меня вопрос к выступающим. Касается так называемых серых грязных списков. Все-таки включение организации в эти списки связано с ограничением конкуренции. Вот после включения в список той или иной организации были ли судебные прецеденты, которые все-таки отменяли включение в этот список? И продолжение этого вопроса, а включение в этот список для организаций пожизненный или все-таки на какой-то срок? Есть ли механизм исключения из этих списков? Спасибо.
Thank you. I think that probably Mercia and others would want to speak to that.
I have two questions, one to John Morrison, and it relates to domestic workers. You were speaking about, levying funds and that companies can control it, but how about domestic workers and how about other side? When, specifically in Arab countries, when the employer pays to the government, to the bank, the amount of ticket and the amount of the health insurance. And that becomes a deterrent for domestic workers not to leave. That is one question. Second question on the child labor in mining sector. I have done a report on children in mining and quarrying for UN General Assembly, and I would like to say that you were speaking about companies exploiting children. But what about artisanal mining? When children are exploited by criminals, very far in unseen areas. And there were only very few examples by Swiss companies that were trying to provide equipment and trying to help the children, and also interest of governments. There is only one example which I can bring. There was a government of Peru that signed agreement with a Swiss company. Other than that, there are no examples. And children are still continuing to work in artisanal mining and quarrying. So these are my two questions. So I just want you to comment on this.
I think we'll take those two more questions, and then I think that we would have to stop there.
Так, слышно меня, да? У меня тоже продолжение вопроса. Вот представитель ОДКБ задал очень интересный вопрос, и, наверное, Мерси его прокомментирует по отношению к грязному листу или черному списку, как у нас говорят. Я представляю общественную организацию, зовут меня Лариса Бойченко, я с севера России, из Республики Карелия. Общественная организация «Карельский центр гендерных исследований», Karelian Center for Gender Studies, находится территориально в университете. Еще я преподаю историю государства и права, международное право, публичное и частное. Так вот, когда мы предлагали в России создать подобный список, нам все время говорили о нарушении прав предпринимателей и что будут судебные процессы в обязательном порядке. Список, для нас, для неправительственных организаций был, когда мы знали о таких фирмах и о таких организациях. Но официально вывешивать его, рассказывать, нам не разрешалось. Говорили, что надо, чтобы было судебное решение. Каким образом тогда в Бразилии вы это делаете? То есть, если на государственном уровне какая-то структура, мы обращались у нас в Федеральную миграционную службу с такой просьбой, нам было отказано, которая вместе, может быть, с НКО такой список создает, и, соответственно, вот по судебным прецедентам, если они появились. Это вопрос, и, может быть, если вы не возражаете, небольшое еще предложение. Вот дело в том, что мы символично собрались в России на такую интересную конференцию, и я рада, что Министерство иностранных дел участвует в данном мероприятии. Дело в том, что более 100 лет назад в Российской империи открылся первый Всероссийский съезд по борьбе с торгом женщинами. Это было в 1910 году. Дело в том, что в тот период из России женщин даже в Бразилию вывозили, а в Россию ввозили из Австро-Венгрии и даже Швейцарии. Второй такой съезд был намечен к проведению в 1915 году, но помешала тогда Первая мировая война. Так вот, предложение мое касается в том числе, чтобы мы могли проследить в ретроспективе, может быть, данную тему, не упуская исторических моментов, а вновь и вновь показывая нашим правительствам, что это тема, которую необходимо решать. Спасибо.
And this would be the last question, I think. Right. I think we have
Yes, I'm Dorothy Rosgar from ECPAT, and I would like to talk about the story of Accor, because one of the results of Accor is not just what it's done within its own company, but all the other major hotel chains have seen that this is the platinum standard, and many have joined the code or taken on their own programs because of this. And I'm wondering if Alexis could just give us a bigger part of the story, because it's not just protecting children that, are in some way affected by the hotel, visiting the hotel or being brought into the hotel, but the company's commitment to honoring its workers and the dignity of its workers and good wages for its workers, so that the children of workers are also protected. So a little bit about that, I think, would be inspiring for all of us before break.
Thank you for that last question. And it sounds like you're saying that Alexis was being too modest in his presentation. So in the minute each that the presenters have to, I'd like to give them a minute each to answer the questions that we've heard, which have touched on the dirty lists, domestic workers, the mining sector, whether there have been prosecutions, more about Accor hotels, and there was a question as well about the internet. Can we start? I think we can just go in order. So, but reverse order, since you were last, why don't you go first, Alexis?
Well, it's very difficult for me to elaborate on a worldwide basis. But once again, as I told you, we implemented an ethics charter in 2014, where a lot of things that are related to the teams, to our employees, or to the employees that are working in the hotel, is of course part of it. The hospitality industry is a human intensive. You need to have people cleaning the rooms. You have to be people welcoming the guests. You have to have people preparing food. So without these people being properly managed, trained, paid, of course, you don't have the engagement level that you need. Of course, we have things to work on. I mean, you mentioned that sourcing. I mean, the housekeeping today. Most of the housekeeping is very often outsourced, and this is a matter of attention. But this is also a matter of countries, government implementing legislation and enforcing it, because it's nice to say, okay, I've implemented. If you don't enforce, just forget it doesn't work. So Accor is not only committed, but as a major international company, we have to respect the law, of course, and this is something we're doing. Once again, thank you for the good words. Very difficult for me to elaborate on that. I can say that yes, we're careful. Of course, we're taking care of our employees, because if they are not taken care of properly, they will never give back the smile to our customers. And our business is customer oriented also. So and this is a face-to-face. This is not a thing like we're signing a big contract with Siemens or a one-shot group. This is not the way it's working in the hotel industry. And when you're not behaving properly, or when you're meeting a problem in Bangkok, this has an impact in New York, and this has an impact in London, etc. So I mean, these commitments that we're doing towards our teams is also business related, and I think it's a virtual circle that we're trying to implement. And one last thing I wanted to say, nothing to do with that, but business has to make profit. This is the aim of the business. And you're doing profit by increasing your sales and cutting your costs. And of course, it's easier to cut your cost by using cheaper force. But this is again, a matter of legislation. And the second thing is, it's really, I'm a small guy in Accor, but why don't companies that are really CSR compliant don't get either bonuses, tax breaks, etc.? Because, we are in business to do profit. So no profit, no business, no work. No work, misery. So help us to help you.
Hopefully consumers would also reward you with participating in your brand.
Actually, consumers are more and more, especially in Western Europe, touched by this, concerned by that, and this is also the reason why we implementing that, because a positive CSR behavior drives more business. And it's not only, by the way, it's not only people trafficking, it's also fair trade food, non-usage of food or for example, of fish that is on the red list of protected species. It's a huge commitment, complicated commitment to hold on a day-to-day basis. It's beautiful when it's written on the charter, but when it comes to everyday work in the hotel, it's a very complicated things to implement.
Thank you. Samir?
And thank you, Alexis. I think we could have a whole session on some of the things you mentioned. I'm going to just talk very, very briefly about the artisanal mines. I think the brief answer is yes. That's pretty much it. But I'll give you some specific example from at least one of the studies that I saw that Geopol did in Tanzania around tanzanite, and they picked that gem to do a survey on using mobile phones because it only comes from 1-2 kilometer area in Tanzania, and the government highly regulates it in zones. There are 4 zones. 2 of the zones are by this quasi-state company called Tanzanite 1. The other 2 zones are artisanal. One thing the survey showed was that there was equal amounts of child labor and health and safety violations in both zones, the regulated zones and the unregulated zones in the artisanal mines. What also was very apparent is that even though the supply chains were slightly different, there was more regulation around the Tanzanite 1 government-backed ones and proper channels. The stones from both places ended up, through different means, to the same areas in India to get polished. The market where they were bought and sold right after being harvested looked a little different. But according to the workers that were interviewed by Geopol, they were still owned by individuals. Each mining hole was still owned by an individual who could be tracked. There could be a public record search done on them. So there are various tools and ways to find out where that supply chain may look a little different than the regulated one, but it still does exist and still can be mapped. I think it reminded me of something what Elaine said yesterday from JTI. There's only so much diligence she needs to know. There's only so much survey she probably needs to do when she knows that this is a problem area in this production area in this country or this region that you need further attention to and need to spend then your CSR and other sourcing dollars to trace and track.
Thank you. And Marcia, did you want to discuss the dirty list questions?
I try to explain. That is a long time fight and struggle in Brazil. This is the main problem that we have. But just to make sure, the dirty list is an exclusivity document or list made by the federal government. No states or municipality can make the dirty list, only the federal level. And it's exclusivity. And the list is like the companies, usually people call to the government saying that they have suspicion of labor exploitation in some places. So they organize this kind of due diligence. And then the company, the due diligence is made by inspectors, like a public audit person, very well qualified to do that. And they go there and they find out about the slavery condition. They make a document, and the company has two levels or two instances to appeal to prove that they are innocent. So the first is the first moment with the labor inspector talk with them. If the labor say that is slavery, that go to the second level, and then they have to call the lawyers and prove that they are innocent. If they say no, you are guilty, then go to the high level of the federal administrative ministry, and there, if they are considered guilt, so the company's or person's name goes direct to the dirty list. They stay there for 2 years. So what is the point of the dirty list? It's a legal instrument because we have in our constitutional document a transparency law that say that each citizen could ask from the government for any information. Just go online and say, I want this information. How money is invested in that school in my neighborhood? So you have a right to have this information. But this law says also that if the information is for the public interest, the government can publicize by themselves. So the dirty list, it's hanging in this kind of legislation. So the companies can't complain about that. And the dirty list is not kind of punished by itself. It's just make transparency information. What the civil society and a lot of companies do with that list, it's not the labor ministry business, you understand? So when we created the National Pact, we make the companies use this list to not doing business with these companies. They can do, it's their decision, but they are bringing risk on their supply chain, right? And also our central bank, say that, central bank? I don't know. The Central Bank of Brazil make an internal law or internal legislation say that no banks should finance any companies with child labor, for deforestation, or labor exploitation or slavery. So the banks also look for the dirty list. So if a company wants to do this commercial profit, if they can't make deal with their consumers or clients, or also cannot get money from the bank to finance their production, that it's a very terrible problem, economical problem. So that is our fight on that. Okay, so the civil society or business community or whatever, we cannot take the company's name from the list. They go to the judiciary process. I get sued because I put the list on my website, so Impacto has a lot of companies go to judiciary and make us have a hard time. I guess it's this. Just last week, we have freedom on domestic work for the first time in Brazil, because our legislation don't allow inspectors to go inside of the private house of anyone. So if he is inside of the house, the government can't go inside and free people. But this woman, she was 68 years old, working as domestic working inside of a house in a farm. And she was there for many years. Her husband dies, and she has his pension. And her boss took her pension as well, and told that she could not live never because she also buy in her small store, so she has a debt bandage for life. Was like stealing her money, make she slave on that and working for free in the home. So she get freed by someone that called. I feel like that is a problem, and we are so proud to make the first freedom of domestic work.
Congratulations on that. And I think that this is why she's come so far, because Brazil has a unique model, and obviously it depends on a particular form of government and the willingness of government will, let's put it that way. And anyone who wishes to talk with her more about that during lunch, should probably do so, because it's a very distinct model. I think we're going to jump to Irena and then John.
Okay, I would like to respond a bit the questions of NGOs regarding what if we will introduce a dirty list and then the companies will sue us. During our project focused on the public-private partnership or partnership with the private sector, we also learned different strategies. And this actually can be one of the strategy. For instance, Greenpeace, which is a huge NGO working on environmental issue, takes it as a very strategic point once the company will start to sue Greenpeace. They perceive that they actually won. Because once the case is at the court, it will definitely pay the attention of media, and they will never go back with what they actually did. And this, for NGOs, it's also a strategic decision. Are we going to be sued by the companies? Are we strong enough to be sued? And of course, you have to very much think strategically. You can create partnership with a law firm, because obviously it's something what can also enhance their name if they will represent a court proceedings which will be in the media. So it's something what you can consider as a strategy. We are going to name and shame companies that are violating labor rights and are actually doing labor trafficking, but we are ready, and we have strong partners that will help us to stand the court proceeding. Because, as I said during my presentation, the reputation matters, and reputation is something what's very fragile. And if they will lose, if the company will lose their reputation, regardless of whether they will win or lose the court proceeding, it's very important for them. So it can be one of your strategy. Let's name and shame, and let's be ready to be sued. And once we will be sued by the company, we actually won, because we are going to present the case in media, and definitely media will be interested. So this is just one of my points if you will decide to go to this strategic direction.
And I think you're perhaps saying when media is interested, then consumers are interested?
Yeah, and definitely consumers are very much interested.
John?
Right, I'll be quick. Some very good questions. On the internet point, I do think the internet has a big role to play in awareness raising, particularly sex trafficking, child trafficking, and what we heard yesterday about organ trafficking. The public awareness, definitely. I think for labor exploitation, it's trickier, because our research is that workers sometimes don't believe. I mean, if you publicize the fact that they don't have to pay the agencies, in some villages, they will still pay the agencies because they don't believe that they're going to get the good job. They, in Bangladesh, we've heard workers who think they're going to be trafficked into ISIS in Syria if they don't pay the agency. So this fake news thing is a big issue. But of course, there are intermediaries. I mean, these things called trade unions, right? No one seems to talk about them anymore, but I think trade unions play a very important role in mediating information for workers around exploitation. Just on Alexa's point about incentives, I think, and a couple of recommendations for the OSCE then. One is, I mean, I think the dirty list issue is a good example, but it is more complex in Europe, perhaps, to follow the example directly. But what about public procurement? You know, government expecting business. Why doesn't government lead by example? In most parts of Europe, government is 20% of GDP. Many businesses sit in the supply chains of government. We've yet to see any government in Europe include these issues of trafficking and forced labor in public procurement. I'd love to see OSCE governments taking a lead there. Export credit is another way you can reward good companies economically through the public purse for taking leadership. You can produce ranking that inform investors and consumers about which companies are doing better than others. And those are also economic drivers for companies. There's a lot OSCE governments could do to incentivize business. The other recommendation for OSCE on public-private partnerships is a model of what a good PPP on this issue could look like. We've heard lots and lots of examples. There is nowhere I know where you can go and get a generic model of how to create a public-private partnership on this issue. I think OSCE could play a good role there. And finally, I think the lady who asked me the question on domestic workers has gone, but I'll just finally say, domestic workers, it's much harder to support them because obviously the employer are private families, they're behind closed doors, they are hard to reach. You require strong legislation. And many of us, of course, have looked at the work that the government of the Philippines has done, perhaps more than any other government, to protect its domestic workers in foreign countries. So consular assistance and a proactive role of embassies, like the government of the Philippines has done, is perhaps one of the better ways of protecting domestic workers. But I do acknowledge the position the OSCE has taken on diplomatic domestic workers, and that is leadership, and I congratulate you on that. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And Mercia has pleaded for 30 more seconds.
I promise. I see the national pact works very well because internationally, companies are checking if they are or not inside of the national pact to make business. So it's like work is a white list or a good list of who is doing well. And also I know that the national pact is working when companies in the dirty list is calling me and almost yell on the phone, take my name off there, you know, your company is not buying from me. That is two indication of success.
That really was 30 seconds. I know we're ready for lunch. This was a panel about prevention, and I think I will only comment that we haven't reached prevention yet, so law enforcement prosecutions are key as well for that public part of the private-public partnership, meaning real prosecutions of traffickers put in jail criminally. And I think, but we were looking to the future when it won't even be necessary to prosecute, but that's still a long ways off. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm finally going to use this bell to say that it's time to go for the break. And please thank our speakers.
15 minutes to come back.
15?
Yes, just
oh, you have 15 minutes to come back. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not lunch, it's coffee. That's my jet lag.
Thank you, Lord.
It feels like that.
Yes.
Good job.
Are you in DC?
I'm in Florida.
Yeah, I've known this Steve for many, many years.
I liked your, oh my gosh, it's not just in the air, this is good. That's why I asked about what to do about retaliation.
Yeah.
When a Thai worker complains. Well, but he's waiting to ask you questions.
Both of you.
Oh.
Right. I noticed as one of your sponsors also in Brazil.
But this issue about whether other countries will follow the news, you must get asked that all the time.
But they're actually a partner of ours in the U.S.
But are they doing this PR for tax wars, or are they really?
They actually evaluated it after Bangladesh, I have to say. When a bunch of people died, they looked for a really effective model of supply chain responsibility where there was enforcement, and that's what we had. And I didn't speak about our program because I'm a moderator, not a sixth presenter. But it has it where if there's forced labor in the supply chain, you have to cut off purchases. We basically control sales. And that you should see our suppliers focus. I think they'll lose 3 or 6 months of sales to the company when there's been forced labor. So Walmart has actually came on board without a campaign, without a boycott. So there's 28 months of negotiations. But they are good in that aspect. I'm not saying they don't have problems in other aspects.
I think it's like a tale of two parts. the Israelites do Thailand do a lot of good work with Walmart for that specific supply chain. And there's probably many reasons why they don't take from that specific supply chain. Partly because while the public pressure on Kenya and Uber and all the reports, and it's a very positive work, and our suppliers are actually changing because of the leverage that Walmart has. It's very pro-business kind of model. But on the other hand, they also sit on different associations in the U.S. where they're trying to dilute provisions and national laws. And there are also lots of wage concerns with their own stores, etc. So it is almost a bit of a...
How disturbed is your supply chain? Maybe if you don't want to change it, but if consumers are messing too much with, they're feeling like there's going to be some... Oh.
Hello. So we are going to start the final session, which is policy recommendations before the final session, the final closing session. And we have the 4 rapporteurs from the 4 previous panels. Mark Heath from the Gangmasters Labor Abuse Authority, right? Because it used to be, yes, it used to be the Gangmasters Licensing Authority, who will report back on panel 1 and also make some additional observations. Then Petya Nesterova, the Executive Secretary from the Council of Europe, will make a report back on panel 2, which was more about the role of governments. Then Bob Mitchell from the Electronics Industry Citizenship Coalition will report back on panel 3, which was more about the role of the private sector and initiatives. And then Vineta Palatsidi from the Council of Baltic Sea States will report back on the final panel, which we just had. So she has the hardest job, or the easiest, depending. She hasn't had time to prepare, but it's also fresh in her head. So without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to Mark. And we also have time for a very short discussion at the end before the final session, which we will try to start on time. And I just wanted to mention one thing. Please, for those of you who have tweeted, please retweet each other, retweet the ones that are out there to get the information out about this event. I also I'll repeat this at the end. We would like you to please fill out the evaluation forms, which are on the table outside in both Russian and English. This is very important to have your feedback on what you found most interesting and what we can also take into consideration for the future. And there are also a few copies of biographies out there. And just to let you know that we will also be following up to send you the list of participants from this conference, because it was so long it would have killed a lot of trees to print. So we are going to send it to electronically, since that's also one of the priorities of the Austrian Chair for Sustainable Development. And so we will send you all the information out electronically. So now, Mark, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ruth. In the interest of time, I will try to be as brief as possible, but it's very difficult to be brief over such a wide-ranging conference, and many of the topics discussed were of real interest to me and can apply to the work in the UK. Starting off with Ilias yesterday morning, what struck me most was that there is no shortage of information, guidance, and actually convention and protocol that is already in place for tackling human trafficking. And I think it's important to recognise that there are structures that we can use, can apply, and one of the recommendations, particularly starting at that point, is to ratify and utilise what is already there. A phrase we use in the UK is we don't have to reinvent the wheel, and I think we can apply that to this very much so, in that UNODC has a number of case studies and information that's available to refer to. But equally importantly, and I think the theme for the conference itself, is that self-regulation needs to be supported by government and by legislation. Certainly when you're looking at recruitment practices for labour exploitation, self-regulation is a tool in the box, but it can't be the sole tool that is there to be used. Petra reinforced the message yesterday about the binding obligations that are in place, and also reminded us that definitions of human trafficking in law aren't necessarily clear, which obviously has an impact upon the legislators, the regulators, and more importantly perhaps, business in understanding what the issues are and where the pitfalls might be.
Freedom of movement causes its own difficulties and own problems, as we know. And one of the things that can help in the exploitative arrangements is the lack of regulation and lack of clear guidance in this area, which actually can be an enabler for human trafficking to exist. So again, a reminder that legislation needs to be used. But also a reminder that government needs to take and play a role in this by being able to look at its own procurement services. As we mentioned earlier on, 20% of GDP can be from whatever the state does. So therefore the state has a real role to play in making sure that their supply chains are free from human trafficking, and therefore we need to reflect on that. The IOM presentation from Marina, really interesting in relation to the IRIS project, focusing and concentrating on the approach taken across the globe to try and understand what the labour supply chain looks like, but more importantly for me, resolving the issue of the worker pays phenomenon. Until we move ourselves away from the worker pays approach, we'll never really start to address this issue, in my view. Using again the tools that are available, and the IOM are keen to sort of draw together the best practice for their IRIS project, which is felt it will make a real impact, and I've no doubt that it will, having been involved in that myself. Moving across to Vineta yesterday and her presentation about the work of the Baltic Sea states, interesting how collaboration between governments and states is a real effective change and enabler to bring together the group of nations that can make a real difference. Again, making sure that things aren't done in isolation in certain pockets and certain areas, but we need to have a global recognition of the issue, moving those global issues into local and regional partnerships, but more importantly, having a real commitment to change from those that can seek to effect change. Again, a reminder that mobility does bring its own problems, but also responsibilities. And one thing that I was really interested to hear was that not only do we need to talk about risks, we need to talk about the opportunities that those risks present. There are opportunities to effect change if we have an open and honest dialogue between states, between the private sector, between the NGOs and unions, wherever, to make sure that we can bring about that change. I was very interested to hear the views of Natalia from Sakhalin Energy yesterday and the work that that company has been doing, highlighting that there's the transnational response of business and also the response of entrepreneurs to take account of labour exploitation and worker rights within any part of their supply chain and their labour supply chain. Reminded us that business is all about what happens in practice. We can talk about the theory for a long while, but let's see what works in practice. Looking at risk assessments, subcontracting is a real issue within their supply chain, which they highlighted, and making sure that you monitor what is happening in your supply chain and make it part of the tender and contract process, again to make sure it reflects what's happening in reality. Last but not least, Igor from the Confederation of Labour and Seafarers Union, really passionate about the fact that political changes don't necessarily improve the life of the worker. Exploitation can happen no matter what the circumstance. Very keen to say that workers not being paid is common practice in a lot of areas within his area of influence. And also a reminder that we need to understand what laws can be applied so we can effectively tackle this issue, especially when you're looking at seafarers. Said that employers can be seen as unreliable partners. Perhaps we need to change that mindset in making sure that we're actually all seen as valued partners and equal partners. But finally, migrant workers shouldn't be different from workers' indigenous population. Just to conclude, a few recommendations that struck me really early on. I know these will be subject to debate and discussion, but certainly working with international organisations is key. There are organisations that have organised this conference, who have presented here, need to be around the table together and use their influence and use their experience and expertise. Ensure clarity of legal definitions. Understand what we're all working to and have some common understandings within the legal framework. Don't forget the links to migration, the issues that throws up. Looking at the work of the IOM and IRIS in particular, looking across borders for destination, source and transit countries alike to join up the dots within that. Use examples of private sector initiatives. We're not saying that across the board every example in each country will fit what's required in a different country, but learn from experience of others. Use voluntary codes of practice, use experience wherever we can. And to conclude, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We have structures, we have protocols, we have partnerships in place. Let's expand and build upon those, because it can only be done with effective partnership working. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mark, for that comprehensive summary of panel 1. I'm going to give the floor immediately to Petya.
I'm going to report on panel 2, which was about the role and responsibility of states to combat human trafficking. A panel which actually had representatives from 6 different countries, representing different public authorities and agencies. We had people from the Netherlands, the UK, France, Belarus, Russia, and Greece. And I'm going to say a few words about each of them briefly. Some of them are no longer here. Also to the benefit of those who were not here yesterday. I hope I will do justice to the excellent presentations that all of them did. But before I do that, I just want to say how impressed I am by the wealth of expertise and people that have been brought to this conference by the organizers. I must say I have, in the last 6 years that I've been working in this area, I have not attended such a conference which has succeeded in bringing people from all over the world, more or less, from so many different walks of life. I have never seen so many business representatives taking the floor. It's always been a challenge, actually, to bring them to speak to such events. So basically, I just want to say big congratulations to the organizers for succeeding to organize such a well-attended event, to your partners here in Russia, but in particular to those who actually worked so hard, Ambassador Zhobrusinova, Ruth, Radu, and Darana. Really, really impressed. Now, I'll go back to our core business. So panel 2, it's interesting that we had a presentation from something which is quite unique in Europe, if not in the world, an independent national rapporteur on trafficking human beings and sexual violence, the Dutch representative, Corinne Detmer. And I must stress that this is a model that the Council of Europe actually promotes as a best practice when it comes to monitoring the work that is done in any country in anti-trafficking. So the Dutch independent national rapporteur, actually her mandate derives from law, and she is appointed by, well, the King of the Netherlands. So she reports then to the government and to Parliament. And so it's a really unique model. So Corinne actually provided us with a very insightful analysis of what it means, the public-private or private-public, as you prefer, partnership against human trafficking, recalling the powerful position of corporations and the responsibilities which come with it. And that corporate social responsibility is not just a charitable act or a public relations activity, but it should be daily business. And she stressed the shared responsibilities of state and business in this area, which actually should come with a common understanding and use of common language. And she called for actually changing the paradigm that has been applied, not separating the two, but actually applying a coalition paradigm. So I remember a very graphic slide with the paths of the private and public actually merging together to lead us towards progress. So that was very, very inspiring and insightful, maybe over-optimistic, but then Heraklis Moskov, who is the Greek rapporteur, or coordinator, he's not here today, both actually, on human trafficking. Unlike Corinne, he actually sits in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Greece. That is a model which a few countries in Europe have applied, where the coordination role is seated in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Here was a bit more I should say, pessimistic about this partnership, to the extent that there have been difficulties in Greece, as in most other countries, to engage with business on this issue. And there's a clear private-public dichotomy, which is not easy to overcome. Still, Heracles stressed the need for adopting a comprehensive approach to human trafficking. This is what all the international organizations try to promote. And comprehensive means not leaving out anyone. So you really can't afford to leave the private area or trade unions. Of course, civil society is by itself already there. So this multi-stakeholder approach that they've been promoting in Greece, which starts from the identification of victims, where they've been trying in Greece to involve labor inspectors and hospital staff, it's very important. But also working with retailers, with market companies, especially in countries where agricultural production is huge, as it is in Greece, or indeed countries like Spain and Italy in Europe. In fact, in Greece, basically this engagement with business has been very much around awareness raising, culture, media, education, the organization of festivals. Moving on to Mark, I will not try to summarize what Mark said, but I just want to say once again that the GLA, or as it is now GLAA, is another, I think, unique best practice example from the European continent, at least, to the extent that it has been set up on the one side to regulate the supply of workers to a number of labor-intensive industries, but on the other side also to enforce. And its enforcement powers have been recently reinforced, giving more powers to actually investigate. So the GLA combines civil with criminal powers, so it is quite unique. Mark also underlined certain difficulties that in the UK have been experienced to convince the private sector to engage, and some reluctance to openly talk about problems. But he stressed that actually the message that we should be giving is that law enforcement and business are on the same side. So he stressed the need for two-way dialogue and flow of information, which actually means that no one should be left out, and auditors in fact have to be brought into this. He stressed, well, he mentioned the reluctance of auditors to actually report to law enforcement, well, provide information to law enforcement as an obstacle. He also referred to, the role of procurement. I think you were a bit skeptical about how much one can hope to move away from procurement, which is based on the lowest cost to the most socially responsible offer. Now, Pauline, who is with us still, provided another perspective from the French national coordinating structure, MIPROF, which is actually in France based within the ministry in charge of the rights of women, or at least was, unless I think these things change now with the new government in France, maybe. So she actually presented us with this brand new piece of legislation, which has been adopted earlier this year by the French National Assembly, and the new law on due diligence, which can play a very important role in preventing human trafficking. But in addition to this new law, she also spoke about what is already in the National Action Plan on Human Trafficking, the actions which are related to discouraging demand, and also the new action plan on business and human rights, which a lot of countries are now in the process of elaborating and adopting, and France is already doing that. And finally, the corporate social responsibility platform, which already exists in France, and it's another very useful tool. We had two representatives from law enforcement bodies, the Belarusian representative. Should I be ending? No. The Belarusian, Dmitry Tsaun, who actually really presented how Belarus the Belarusian state have taken the lead in adopting law, ratifying international conventions, putting in place regulation, adopting national action plans, and making sure that all this is enforced, with the really, well, impressive result of bringing down by tenfold the number of identified victims over, well, the span of time. I think what's very important in Belarus is that they have now a national referral mechanism, which is enshrined in a regulation, in a decree, a government decree. And I think that is, I think, important for most countries to, well, for all countries to really have a national referral mechanism, which sets the clear roles and responsibilities of all the stakeholders, says how a victim is to be identified, treated, helped, assisted, etc. So I think it's that was a good example of how a victim-centered approach should be regulated. Last but not least, we had Sergei Melnikov. From what I understand, he is from the investigative committee, which is law enforcement, but he has the sort of academic side to it. So it's, I think, a bringing together of the research and law enforcement. This whole area of trafficking for the purpose of organ removal and transplantation, of course, is still more or less a black hole. So doing research on this is extremely important. The Council of Europe opened for signature about 2 years ago a new convention in this area on organ removal. Not many states have yet, well, have signed it. So I think it's a really important convention that one should sign and ratify. The main conclusions from his presentation was, of course, legislation. Countries have to have up-to-date legislation. And again, I appeal at least to the European countries, have in mind what is available as international legal treaties when you adopt new laws. And also the need for information and education, stressing the important role that media would play, and the church. We shouldn't forget the religious-based organizations, of course, in all this area fighting human trafficking. And finally, the need for supporting donor and donor organizations. Now, I've taken quite a lot of time, so I will basically try to put forward a few recommendations, if I may, and they're basically about what the state's role and responsibility is. And maybe I'll try to summarize them by using a few verbs. What do states do well? They legislate, they regulate, they enforce, prevent, they raise awareness and educate, but above all, they have to first recognize the problem, put the finger on the problem, and they also have to support research, because it is by fact-based research that we actually come to political decisions. So I'll try to unpack these verbs so that they don't sound like some slogans. But before that, I just want to say that, of course, trafficking in human beings is committed by private individuals or legal entities. Regardless of that, in the area of human rights, there is an acceptance that even when it is the responsibility for an initial act does not fall on a state official, the state nevertheless can incur international responsibility for a private act in case of failure on the part of the state to prevent or to respond to such an abuse, or indeed to remedy abuses which are committed by private persons or entities. Now, in Europe, of course, there's the European Convention of Human Rights, which is implemented by 47 countries, and the European Court of Human Rights has numerous case law on exactly concerning the state's accountability for failure to protect individuals from adverse human rights impacts resulting from the activities of companies. Now, this case law of the court until recently has been practically, well, mostly on environmental issues, but as I mentioned yesterday, there is a new case law now in the face of Chaudhry against Greece. And it is, I think, important for governments to bear in mind that they don't need to wait for accidents to happen, like the 2004 drowning of the Chinese cocoa pickers or some fire which destroys a factory. So their role should be preemptive and preventive rather than waiting for accidents to happen, clearly. Now, a lot of references have been made to the UN guiding principles on human rights, the standard of due diligence. I'm not sure how that translates in Russian. I'm always challenged to translate it in my own language. But anyway, this standard is the accepted benchmark against which state actions to prevent violations originating from acts of third parties are to be judged. So under this standard, states are obliged to exercise a measure of care in preventing and responding to the acts of private entities that interfere with established rights. So failure to prevent an anticipated abuse or violation by a private individual or entity will invoke the responsibility of the state. So one thing that states should do is put in place national action plans on human rights and business, as recommended by the UN guiding principles. Also recently the Council of Europe Committee of Ministers adopted a recommendation on this issue. When it comes to legislation, so of course the state's role to legislate is crucial in this area. But it is not just by criminalizing human trafficking, by transposing the internationally adopted definition that this will happen. Because action to combat human trafficking actually lies at the intersection of criminal law, human rights law, but it also moves to other fields of law, such as labor and migration law. So in fact, the legislative element should spread across all these areas of law. And there have to be legislative measures also to enforce the protection of the rights of migrants, the possibilities of legal migration, and labor law enforcement. The possibility of criminal liability for company is provided in many jurisdictions, including for crimes which constitute human rights violations, such as human trafficking, and this is in fact a requirement of international treaties. The enforcement, of course, is another matter, as was mentioned by many speakers. I will not mention once again the need for joining international treaties at the UN, ILO, Council of Europe, etc. level. That has been said, and it's something that, well, Mark spoke about as well. When it comes to, again, I think he mentioned that, but the need for states conducting a human rights-led revision of their procurement practices, because states obviously do business with the private sector, their state-owned enterprises, etc. There's also the disbursement of overseas development assistance. So. In Europe, in the European Union, there's a new procurement directive which actually mentions the need for companies to be excluded from procurement procedures if they have been convicted for human trafficking. I think it's important not to wait for a conviction, because these convictions are very rare, but the procurement policies should actually be also requiring companies to be proactively checking on whether they're using forced labor and traffic labor. Another action of states would be to adopt legislation when it comes to the disclosure of due diligence by businesses. There were examples already mentioned from France and the UK of new legislation. By the way, here I wanted to say that I left yesterday a few copies of a recent report, which is about what state, business, and civil society could be doing in this area, in the area of reducing demand for human trafficking. So if there's interest, I could send more copies of it. Now, regulation is another role of states. The GLLA model, of course, is a good example. The absence of effective state regulation of labor markets is one of the factors which creates an environment in which it is possible and profitable to use trafficked people. Labor inspectors in most countries have limited capacity and do not cover all economic areas. For example, the domestic work in most countries is well, still excluded. So there's a scope for actually strengthening the role of regulation and enforcement. Convictions were mentioned. Well, that's part of enforcement, of course. And where governments can do more is by joining forces with international organizations and civil society, not forgetting trade unions, is to continue to increase private sector awareness about human trafficking through training, education programs, workshops using the media. Finally, governments should provide incentives for business to participate in anti-trafficking efforts, such as positive recognition and financial benefits and tax incentives. I will end on a final word. Yes, I know I've gone on for too long. I remember reading once that it was Aesop who said in the 6th century BC that when all is said and done, more is said than done. So we've said a lot of things yesterday and today, and I hope that moving from talk to action will take place after this conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Petya. I just want to add one or 2 points. Also yesterday, of course, the Austrian National Rapporteur, Ambassador Tichy Fisselberger, also spoke as an introductory speaker on behalf of our chair in office, which is Austria currently, and she's also a national coordinator who is in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, since also the special representative has been here on a follow-up country visit to Russia, and one of the things she's also discussed is the importance of coordination mechanisms and also where they're housed. So this is another example of when a national coordinator is in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and doing a great job, including how she presented yesterday some examples of cases and relatively new public procurement legislation in Austria on the, similar to what Petya said about looking at the best value rather than the lowest price. And also just to mention about the UK, that it was one other point I think that was made during the conference was that it was actually businesses who came together with civil society to the UK government and asked for this transparency clause, which is in the Modern Slavery Act. So just to show that's another example of when actually the public-private sector came together to actually strengthen legislation. And about Corien Detmeyer, what you said about the Dutch maybe not being realistic and optimistic, there's a famous speech that was made by Martin Luther King, and it said, "I have a dream, not I have a plan." So sometimes we have to dream big just to get the plan going. So now I want to give the floor to Bob Mitchell, who is the rapporteur for the third panel.
Great, thank you. So, as Ruth mentioned, I was the rapporteur for panel 3, which is focused on private sector efforts. This was moderated by John Morrison from the Institute for Human Rights and Business. We had some interesting panelists representing collaborations between private sector and CSOs, such as ECPAT and Fair Food, but then also some examples of large groups of private sector actors and specifically businesses coming together with top-level CEO support within the Consumer Goods Forum with their resolution and principles related to combating trafficking and forced labor. Finally, we saw some individual company engagements in this space from Japan Tobacco International and Philip Morris International, supported by Clifford Chance. And then I'd like to talk about some key points and takeaways from each of those specific panelists, and then begin to synthesize that into some observations and recommendations both policy and activity moving forward. So first, I think John Morrison from IHRB, who's still with us today, started off talking about the fact that there are a sort of famous quote, I found out later that's a Mao quote, around there's 1,000 flowers blooming. There's a lot of actors in this space, a lot of initiatives, both public and private. If you take a look at that landscape, it actually gets quite complex pretty quickly, understanding who's doing what or where the scope boundaries are and how those might be complementary. And I'll circle back to that at the end when I talk about some recommendations moving forward. Dorothy from ECPAT discussed how the private sector is positioned to take a more aggressive and prominent role in combating forced labor and trafficking. She cited examples in the tourism and travel industry where many of those companies have signed up for their code of conduct, and there's some great examples of specific companies who had been through their training actually identifying and remediating, helping law enforcement officials remediate instances of trafficked and forced labor. And talked about the engagement between CSOs, private sector, and states as critical to having success in this space. This was followed up by some public sector examples from both Philip Morris International and Japan Tobacco International on their private efforts, but making the point that they can't go it alone. The private sector has a limited amount of influence, especially when it comes to barriers in for instance, trade, and identifying and enforcing specific instances. I found it interesting when Irina was talking from Philip Morris International around the complex problems they try to work through, not only with trafficked and forced labor, but also around anti-counterfeiting efforts for their products, and the coordination with state agencies is important to make sure that the state is not working against private sector efforts. Given that the indicators that may detect these different types of illegal activities may be very similar, and how the public-private partnership is important there. Moving on to some of the other areas, Clifford Chance discussed how, in the absence of state activity, that in many cases the public sector steps in for self-regulation, but that sometimes only goes so far before a gap in regulation is taken up by regulatory efforts, and that this ends up potentially being an iterative process. And that the private sector should look at this as an opportunity for a competitive advantage rather than a barrier, and to step into that process to make sure that we're pointed towards consistent and harmonized regulations rather than fighting against it and having sort of a patchwork. Two more then on observations from the panelists. So one was Didier from Consumer Goods Forum. I thought he had a great point there at the end when he talked about how when you're faced with a complex problem that simplicity is important in terms of identifying what you're trying to address. In too many cases, the efforts and the initiatives are trying to boil the ocean. They have too many complex requirements and expectations, and when you boil it down to, for instance, the simple 3 points that Consumer Goods Forum has, I think another great example is the Leadership Group for Responsible Recruitment, focusing on the employer pays principle. The EICC's efforts are similar in terms of focusing on fees and passport retention, very similar to Consumer Goods Forum, and saying, these are the root causes, we believe, the turning points, and simplifying it, distilling it down to focusing on those areas where you can find common ground and agreement with other actors, both public and private, is very important to success. And finally, the Fair Food Program, talking about the fact that they have a successful program in Florida in terms of combating trafficking and forced labor in agricultural supply chains there. But many corporations turn away from that, even though there is a proven model, one that's been recognized by the U.S. state government in a very prominent way, and that this behavior has to be influenced. Corporations need to begin to see the competitive advantage of participating in proven models rather than turning away from these. And so summing all these up in terms of a set of conclusions and thoughts for myself, first is that private sector engagement is increasing on this topic. This is not just a state or a CSO or an investor-led issue anymore. We were talking with Ruth last night about the fact that the private sector participation in this event in Berlin last year versus this year, even though it's maybe a little bit less today, but yesterday was dramatically increased. If you look at the success of the advocacy organizations in this space in getting awareness within the private sector, I can tell you the industries that we work with, automotive, toys, electronics, aerospace, jewelry, this is top of mind for almost every one of those companies in those industries. But now we need to begin to work down, right, from the advocacy level, the awareness and the prioritization into work on the ground, right? How do we begin to get down to brass tacks? And coordinated action between public and private actors is crucial to having success. The private sector can implement programs all day long, but if we're not supported by the states in which we do business or our partners do business, then we really are applying Band-Aids. And we'll see the same problems cropping up and up again rather than finding the root cause and transforming those markets that create trafficked and forced labor. And so I think out of this discussion, we identified some critical success factors around public-private partnerships. And one was a reduction of those thousands of flowers coming out. Reducing duplication and increasing partnership. The second is that simplification of goals that I mentioned, not boiling the ocean. Again, a number of examples here that we saw over the course of the last day and a half. And then the third is around creating catalysts. So I think the regulation is an important catalyst, but it must be consistent and harmonized, and that takes public and private actors working in concert, and private recognizing the benefits of leveling the playing field and having consistency and harmonization rather than working against that. And the states recognizing that having the appropriate level of engagement with the private sector to create regulations that actually move the needle in a positive way versus encouraging businesses to stick their head in the sand and ignore the problem is an important key to success. And then also promoting the business case to encourage and influence the corporate behavior. I think there aren't enough examples out there that demonstrate the positive business impact, the shared value between the workers, corporations, and the larger social good that I think we all inherently know is there, but could be documented in a much more meaningful way. And so in terms of recommendations, I'll try to sum it up here so we can move on to panel 4. But one, I thought, we talked about this last night in the debrief. I don't know of an effort right now to bring all this together in a practical set of guidance on these critical success factors, best practices, and business cases for successful public-private partnerships. I think that would encourage, impact-driven models rather than this continued blooming of pilot projects and partnerships that only go so far and end up being interesting and good panel fodder, but not actually making an impact on the ground. I think working to map and recognize the complementary nature of a lot of the initiatives that are out there is important. Recently went through this in a slightly separate space around responsible mining initiatives, where the World Economic Forum and Resolve have been convening the sort of fragmented set of upstream and downstream initiatives and beginning to make some real progress there, including the establishment of an upstream-downstream working group to say there's a lot of connections here and gaps to be filled, and finding out that a lot of those interlock rather than compete. And two more. So one is, again, working towards harmonized regulation and public procurement requirements. There's nothing more frustrating for a company that's trying than to have to do, create disclosures in 50 different ways, or have to create gap analyses between 20 different public procurement requirements that may conflict with each other. And so important aspect there. And then finally, when it gets, I think just to build off of Petya's discussion on national action plans, we've seen in many cases the national action plans focusing on the business side of things, but I think from the private sector perspective, we'd like to see a balance in those discussions between focusing on both the state's duty to protect and the business responsibility to respect human rights in a complementary way, right? We're not competing. We should actually be doing this hand in hand. And seeing that focus in those national action plans would be an important aspect. So I'll conclude my remarks there. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'll hand it back to Ruth.
Thank you so much, Bob, for this very comprehensive overview of panel 3 and for putting some more pieces of this puzzle together. I'm now going to give the floor to Vineta from CBSS to summarize the final panel 4.
A couple of years ago, when we organized training for businesses, one director of one company told me that businesses do not read anything with a staple pin. It means anything that is longer than 1 page, they just don't read. So only 1 page. I'll be very short. I tried to summarize all the great ideas and recommendations from panel 4 in 13 recommendations, short ones. I will start by stating the obvious, but I think it's a basis for everything, that in order to identify instances of exploitation and to prevent it, businesses and governments need to acknowledge that it exists. We need to find out about it in order to do something about it. And even if businesses feel uncomfortable to be associated maybe with human trafficking, they need to be uncomfortable because it makes them to do something. It makes them to correct mistakes. Diversity, different skills and motivations from different actors were highlighted as the strength of the public-private partnership. But it's also important to have clear roles and responsibilities for different actors. Simplicity is what makes a difference in this very complex problem. An additional focus should be placed on recognizing the exploitation of workers as an offense that needs to be appropriately sanctioned, either financial sanctions, administrative, but sanctions and punishment itself, it's not enough. Governments also should set an example for businesses and act as an advisor, as they have a great deal of knowledge. A government should act as a cheerleader for businesses, and sometimes transparency instead of antagonistic approach to businesses is more effective. So wording good businesses could be like a tool to help in prevention of human trafficking. We need to have clear definitions what is understood by exploitation, by forced labor. We should not leave room for interpretation. We need to specify conditions, what we understand, for example, with forced labor. Like Marcia mentioned, there are 4 very clear pillars. We should have monitoring mechanisms in place to monitor compliance of companies. And also states need to provide incentives for businesses. Businesses listen to businesses. We need to engage business community to share best practices, to act like in champions and set example, as it was highlighted in this Accord example. There is a complex reality of global business on several levels, but we need to focus on impact and on outcome, on tangible results. Enough with pilot projects, let's focus on something what works. We need to engage workers in the conversation. They are the primary source of information, and we sometimes forget about them. And there are a lot of technologies which we can use as a tool to reach workers, to engage them in this conversation. And in general, there exists great potential for a vast number of technologies to play a role in prevention of human trafficking. But when it comes to using these technologies and internet and prevention, we are behind traffickers. We need to catch up and to invest in technologies to prevent human trafficking. We need to ensure acting with due diligence in order to prevent abuse and exploitation by building knowledge of the risks of abuse, by establishing independent monitoring, verification, and certification mechanisms to document compliance and implementation of code of conduct. And to finalize, I wanted to say the commitment, dedication, and involvement of management is the key to prevent exploitation. That's it.
Thank you very much. I think we've run out of time because we were going to have the final session at 1, so we're not going to have any discussion, but if you have any further recommendations to us, please let us know electronically or come up to us. We're glad to hear, because we will make a report of this conference, and we'd be glad to hear your thoughts, especially on this evaluation form, which you would find in Russian and English outside the room, as I mentioned. Just one last thing, just from the organizing side, I want to again just thank especially Stepan and Maria and Radu and Daria for all their work, and all of you for coming, and that there were really good examples of partnerships here that are already existing, not only that are trying to go beyond the 1,000 blooming flowers. And I want to thank the rapporteurs and moderators and speakers and all of you participants for this really significant conference, which I think will help us work better and strengthen our partnership and collective action. Thank you. And we invite now the final speakers, Tamara Shashishkina from the MIGIMO, Anatoly Viktorov from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, of course, Medina Minishevna Jarbusinova from the OSCE, as well as the Senator Irina Gent, to make a few closing remarks at this conference. Thank you so much.
Добрый день, уважаемые участники конференции. Прежде всего, позвольте поблагодарить за очень интересную работу, за которой мы наблюдали онлайн, и за ваши комментарии, за ваше участие. Для нас, еще раз повторюсь, это большая честь принимать конференцию такого уровня, затрагивающую вопросы, являющиеся проблемой для решения абсолютно для всего мира, и только лишь сообща мы сможем подойти, наверное, не к решению этого вопроса, а хотя бы к тому, чтобы наметить пути решения и пути борьбы с торговлей людьми. Тем более, что наша конференция проходит накануне буквально Всемирного дня борьбы с торговлей людьми, который будет отмечаться в 4-й раз всего лишь только в этом году, 30 июля. Наверное, вы помните, что Генеральная ассамблея ООН в 2013 году приняла резолюцию 68-192, провозгласив 30 июля Всемирным днем борьбы с торговлей людьми, поскольку в 2010 году именно в этот день был принят глобальный план действий по борьбе с торговлей людьми, и когда на встрече высоком уровне Генеральная Ассамблея подводила итоги глобального плана действий и смотрела дальнейшие пути, было принято решение о том, что именно в этот день необходимо повышать осведомленность о положении жертв торговли людьми. Надеемся, что эта конференция будет небольшим вкладом, в том числе со стороны Московского государственного института международных отношений, в борьбу, которую проводится по всему миру и, прежде всего, которая ведется нашими уважаемыми гостями, Министерством иностранных дел Российской Федерации и организаторами этого мероприятия ОБСЕ. Поэтому я бы хотела поблагодарить также от имени руководства университета Анатолия Дмитриевича Викторова, директора департамента по гуманитарному сотрудничеству и правам человека Министерства иностранных дел Российской Федерации за оказанное доверие по проведению данного мероприятия и за поддержку со стороны специального представителя и координатора по борьбе с торговлей людьми ОБСЕ, уважаемого посла Мадину Джербесунову. Большое вам спасибо, и я передаю слово Анатолию Дмитриевичу Викторовичу.
А если я отсюда буду говорить, это воспринято будет правильно? Спасибо большое. Я очень кратко хотел бы вновь от имени Министерства иностранных дел Российской Федерации поблагодарить всех участников этой конференции. Очень интересная и важная, на наш взгляд. Абсолютно считаю не лишним вновь выразить нашу признательность уважаемой Мадине Бенешевне за инициативу, которую мы поддержали с удовольствием проведения этого мероприятия здесь, в Москве. Поблагодарить ее сотрудников и коллег, которые вместе с коллегами Министерства иностранных дел и Института международных отношений действовали единой командой по подготовке этого мероприятия, что само по себе ценно, на мой взгляд. Надеемся, что мы с Мадиной Бенешевной и ее коллегами продолжим плотно и эффективно сотрудничать на этом важном направлении. Ректорату и ректору лично Анатолию Васильевичу Таркунову, директору Европейского учебного института Тамаре Викторовне, большое вам спасибо за то, что вы с душой и профессионально подошли к организации этого мероприятия. Дискуссия, на наш взгляд, состоялась, затронула широкий круг вопросов, которые связаны с различными аспектами торговли людьми. Подробно обсуждены вопросы и проблемы трудовой эксплуатации, новые формы и способы трафикинга, такие как торговля органами, тканями и людей, и использование преступниками интернета в своей незаконной деятельности. Большой вклад неоценимый внесли, в общем-то, основные участники конференции, для кого она и была организована. Это все эксперты, которые активно выступали, представители международных организаций, корпораций. Такой обмен, на наш взгляд, как раз то, что нужно для того, чтобы совместно подойти к пониманию о том, что нужно делать для решения этой проблемы. Отмечалось, и это соответствует подходам Российской Федерации, что существуют категории людей, которые попадают в особо уязвимые ситуации. К таким относятся, к сожалению, дети. Как известно, Российская Федерация всегда руководствуется защитой, соображениями обеспечения наилучших интересов ребенка, защищает права детей в полном соответствии с нашими международными договорами и национальным законодательством. Особое внимание мы уделяем детям, попавшим в трудную жизненную ситуацию. В этой связи не можем не выразить беспокойство судьбой детей-мигрантов, которые, согласно сообщениям, прибывают в Европу без сопровождения взрослых в очень большом количестве, и многие, которые потом бесследно растворяются на просторах Европы, в основном в странах Евросоюза. Их судьба даже и не прояснена до сих пор. Ну и другими группами людей, которые попадают в зону риска, являются, конечно же, женщины. И в современные, последние годы, последние месяцы даже, может быть, мигранты всех категорий. На нашей конференции конференции, как мы полагаем, были хорошо, ну не хорошо, а затронуты подробно меры, которые различные государства принимают для противодействия торговле людьми, работа бизнеса по защите прав человека и предотвращению эксплуатации, и различные аспекты взаимодействия государственного и частного сектора. Мы со своей стороны не оставили без внимания, обратили внимание на прозвучавшие в ходе конференции и критические замечания. В этой связи я хотел бы подчеркнуть, что правительство Российской Федерации в тесном взаимодействии с профсоюзами и работодателями принимает меры по развитию занятости, по развитию рынка труда, обеспечению социальных гарантий трудящихся, контроля за условиями и своевременной оплатой труда трудящихся мигрантов. У нас принято принципиальное решение об установлении минимального размера оплаты труда не ниже прожиточного минимума, прожиточного уровня. Принимаются меры по сокращению теневой экономики. Мы прекрасно осознаем, что есть такая теневая экономика, и тут мы никакого секрета из этого не делаем. Меры принимаются соответствующие. Формализации или, я бы сказал, легализации трудовых отношений, связанных с мигрантами, которые позволяют наилучшим образом обеспечить защиту прав трудящихся, и в частности трудовых мигрантов, в соответствии, кстати говоря, и с решениями недавними группы 20 рекомендаций Международной организации труда. Мы полагаем, что все, что высказывалось на нашей конференции, а также обмен положительным опытом, рекомендации, которые эксперты здесь представили, не останутся незамеченными и будут проанализированными всеми нами для дальнейшей реализации и продвижения на пути борьбы с торговлей людьми. Надеюсь, обращаясь теперь к зарубежным участникам, что пребывание в Москве было полезным, но как минимум приятным. Будем рады вновь вас видеть здесь и желаю благополучного возвращения, успехов в дальнейшей работе. Спасибо.
Большое спасибо, Анатолий Дмитриевич. Я передаю микрофон члену Совета Федерации Федерального собрания Российской Федерации от исполнительного органа государственной власти Челябинской области Ирине Альфредовне Гехт.
Спасибо. Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. Мне очень приятно присутствовать на этой конференции, тем более, что я являюсь членом российской делегации в Парламентской ассамблее ОБСЕ. И на самом деле я хочу отметить деятельность именно специального представителя по противодействию торговле людьми, потому что эта тема в рамках парламентской ассамблеи звучит регулярно, звучит достаточно актуально и принимаются соответствующие резолюции. Эту тему актуализируют, безусловно, Италия и Греция, которые столкнулись с наибольшим потоком мигрантов. И, на мой взгляд, очень важно все-таки не только акцентировать свое внимание на противодействие торговли, на содействие в трудоустройстве мигрантов, в защите их прав, но все-таки выразить свое отношение о причинах миграции и ликвидации тех очагов, которые ведут к этой миграции. То есть для нас это принципиально важная позиция, которая хотелось бы, чтобы прозвучала и в рамках ОБСЕ. То есть пока мы не погасим те конфликты, которые существуют на Ближнем Востоке, говорить об эффективной борьбе с миграцией не приходится. Поэтому здесь вот мы бы тоже хотели, чтобы в рамках, может быть, рекомендаций эта позиция прозвучала. Для нас, для России, проблема торговли людьми возникла в 90-е годы, когда распался Советский Союз, и мы на самом деле столкнулись с бедностью, с достаточно большой миграцией, которая привела к росту и теневого сектора экономики, но и к такому явлению, как торговля и эксплуатация людей. В последующем, то, о чем говорил Анатолий Дмитриевич, на самом деле было принято достаточно много мер на уровне государства, которые привели к минимизации всех этих последствий. И сегодня мы говорим о том, что в России на самом деле накоплен достаточно большой, в том числе позитивный опыт и превентивных мер, и профилактических мер по борьбе с торговлей людьми.
Существуют структуры в правоохранительных органах, которые этим занимаются. Есть статьи уголовного законодательства и, безусловно, налажены механизмы взаимодействия неправительственных организаций, государства, бизнеса в этом направлении. Отдельно бы хотела сказать о неправительственных организациях, потому что на самом деле в 90-е именно они занимались вот этой проблематикой, получая соответствующую поддержку от иностранных грантодателей, прежде всего от Европейского Союза. Сегодня, как правило, этих общественных организаций, практически деятельность этих общественных организаций сведена на нет, поскольку нет той поддержки, которую они получали там 10-15 лет назад. И, на мой взгляд, это тоже вот надо актуализировать и поддержать те организации общественные на уровне, может быть, президентских грантов, которые занимаются этой проблематикой. И я со своей стороны обещаю, что мы эту тему поднимем. Ну и второй вопрос, который к нам всегда задают, это все-таки разработка и принятие национального механизма по противодействию торговле людьми и соответствующему законодательству. То есть модельный закон, он был разработан много лет назад и несколько раз обсуждался в Государственной Думе, но тем не менее не был принят. Я знаю, что Мадина встречалась вчера с двумя председателями комитетов Государственной Думы по законодательству и по работе с семьей, и там было высказано тоже пожелание о возвращении к обсуждению этого закона. Я думаю, что со стороны законодателей мы поддерживаем эту инициативу и обязательно вернемся к обсуждению этого закона. Тем более, что он содержал, на мой взгляд, достаточно много очень эффективных позиций, которые бы позволили противодействовать этой системе. Тем более, что недавно было принято законодательство, ужесточающее подстрекательство и доведение до суицида несовершеннолетних в сети интернет. И здесь, на мой взгляд, Россия предложила достаточно эффективный механизм противодействия этим явлениям, и который уже привел к тому, что в последние несколько месяцев были задержаны и привлечены к ответственности организаторы преступных группировок, вовлекающих несовершеннолетних и доводящих их до суицида. То есть мы достаточно активно сейчас работаем по противодействию тех преступлений, которые совершаются в сети интернет. И очень важно, что следующая парламентская ассамблея ОБСЕ, которая пройдет в Андорре, она будет посвящена двум ключевым вопросам. Это кибербезопасность, это вопросы образования. А это именно те темы, которые во многом способствуют торговле людьми. Это и сеть интернет, это отсутствие и недостаточность уровня образования среди тех людей, которые оказываются в этом положении. Поэтому спасибо всем за участие. Я тоже думаю, что пребывание в Москве, оно было интересным, полезным, и оно было интересно для нас. И я надеюсь, что в последующем такие конференции надо проводить в Российской Федерации для того, чтобы во многом развеивать те мифы, которые существуют, и те установки, которые во многом сейчас не совсем соответствуют действительности, поэтому мы всегда рады видеть вас. Ну а со стороны законодателей готовы сотрудничать в том направлении, которое сегодня задает вот сегодняшняя конференция. Спасибо.
Большое спасибо, Ирина Альфредовна. Я передаю микрофон специальному представителю послу Джарбусыновой.
Спасибо, Тамара Викторовна. Я хотела бы поблагодарить всех участников конференции, которые вместе с нами на протяжении 2 дней активно обсуждали, задавали вопросы, брали на заметку то интересное, о чем говорили наши выступающие, и что сегодня подчеркнули докладчики из каждой сессии. Я хочу сказать свое спасибо Ирине Альфредовне за то, что она нашла возможность, несмотря на то, что Государственная Дума сейчас активно завершает свою работу и каждая минута дорога, но нашла возможность присоединиться к нам. Ирина Альфредовна, член российской делегации на парламентской ассамблее ОБСЕ, и для нас это вдвойне приятно, и тем более, что она подчеркнула ту готовность, которую вчера во время встречи с председателями двух комитетов по государственному строительству и законодательству в Российской Думе и Комитету по делам семьи, женщин и детей. Я встречалась с Павлом Владимировичем Крашенинниковым и с Плетневой Тамарой Васильевной. И я надеюсь, что наша рекомендация по возобновлению работы в Российской Федерации, в Государственной Думе в рамках рабочей группы над тематическим законом по противодействию торговли людьми будет положительно, эта рекомендация будет положительно принята и продолжена. Законодательство в Российской Федерации, так же, как и во многих наших государствах, оно в принципе соответствует международным стандартам, рекомендациям ООН, тем обязательствам, которые государства-участники взяли на себя в рамках плана действий ОБСЕ по борьбе с торговлей людьми и в рамках дополнения к этому плану. Ну, как я очень часто вынуждена констатировать, посещая наши государства-участники, выступая на различных мероприятиях, практика применения этого законодательства отстает от обязательств. Возникает вакуум. И особенно тогда, когда эти положения по борьбе с торговлей людьми в основном отражены в уголовных кодексах государств. И при этом выпадает та большая ответственность, которую государства взяли на себя и должны нести по оказанию помощи жертвам торговли людьми, по их реабилитации. Поэтому, я думаю, вот возобновление такой работы будет как раз таки отражением того комплексного подхода в ОБСЕ к проблематике торговли людьми. Я надеюсь, что действительно для участников нашей конференции обмен мнениями, состоявшийся на протяжении 2 дней, был очень полезен, и что вы вернетесь домой в свои структуры, к своим коллегам с определенными знаниями, которыми вы поделитесь, и которые помогут в нашей совместной общей борьбе. Мы на протяжении этих дней много говорили о важности партнерства. Тематика конференции «Государственное, частное партнерство», но мы выходили за пределы только государственно-частного партнерства и подчеркивали важность партнерства между международными организациями, важность партнерства с гражданским обществом. И я думаю, что как раз-таки сама атмосфера конференции, она тоже способствовала этому партнерству, поскольку мы видели, что здесь же и закладывалось некоторое партнерство между самими участниками. Я хотела бы подчеркнуть некоторые моменты, которые важны для меня и для моего офиса. И прошу участников надеть наушники, поскольку я перейду на английский язык. I'd like to say that it was heightening to hear from the experts and participants about the wide array of initiatives already being undertaken by international organizations, by governments, by businesses, and by civil societies to tackle various forms of trafficking in human beings. Speaking of partnerships, it has been recommended to strive for more cohesion and coherence of these initiatives. At the OSCE, we have started mapping some of the initiatives which we plan to include into compendium of resources. I mentioned this yesterday, that our office is developing, and we hope that others will conduct mapping so that businesses who are approached by different actors can understand what suits their best needs. One of the strongest conclusions of the conference, in my opinion, is that the public sector and private companies have to complement each other. It is important that the primary responsibility to tackle human trafficking lies with the governments, as there is no international regulatory mechanism for multinational businesses. While it is the obligation of the state to protect human rights and to prevent people from being trafficked and exploited, the private sector have also to be responsible from this point of view. In addition, companies have access to their supply chains and can more easily identify cases of trafficking and exploitation in their supply chains. Therefore, the public and the private sectors have to work together to share expertise, knowledge, and information. Another critical recommendation is the importance of taking into account the voice of workers. We heard examples of NGOs who have formed around labor migrants who were exploited, those using technology to listen to workers, and of trade unions who are the front line in the prevention and fight against trafficking in human beings as an economic issue. Another point I would like to make is that public-private partnerships will be sustainable only if companies are not afraid to report trafficking cases to law enforcement authorities. State institutions have to encourage businesses to report exploitation cases and not punish companies, but have to work with them to ensure a remedy and provide guidance on how to prevent future cases. Otherwise, private sector might be discouraged to report such cases. In promoting public-private partnerships, we as international organizations or state institutions have to understand that working with the private sector implies changing our traditional approach toward fighting human trafficking. We have to speak the business language. We have to develop concrete and practical approaches. We have to understand how businesses operate. Therefore, we have to develop new skills and acquire additional knowledge on how private markets work, how companies identify and manage risks, how trafficking is quantified, and how fighting trafficking could impact the cost of goods, productions of companies. It was great to hear about the concrete resources for NGOs developed and on guidance on how to work with businesses. In the OSCE, we are also trying to serve as an example for others and develop private-public partnerships to fight trafficking. In particular, we're trying to determine how to leverage the OSCE's procurement practices to prevent that goods and services sold and provided to the OSCE are not made by victims of human trafficking and exploitation. Well, we have to admit that there is a lot much to be done by each of us. And I was glad to know that yesterday at the OSCE's Permanent Council meeting, the incoming chair, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Italy, identified combating trafficking in human beings, assistance to victims of trafficking, those identified, among others, identified along migration route as priority for the chairmanship in 2018. So with this, I'd like to once again assure the participants, assure the representatives from our participating states that my office stands ready and will continue working with you, trying to assist you in a better fight against traffickers and in protecting victims and potential victims of human trafficking. And I would like to conclude by reiterating the gratitude of my office, which has already been expressed by Ruth at the earlier session, and my personal gratitude to the co-organizers of the conference, to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, to Mr. Viktorov in particular, to Gimo and Tamara Viktorovna in particular, your staff represented here from the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Stepan and Maria, also to the delegation in Vienna for helping us to make this interesting conference and reality. And I think we will be, all of us, more grateful if this conference will have practical follow-up. And I'd like to thank the interpreters who helped us to better understand each other. Thank you. And of course, I cannot but express my gratitude to my own staff, to Radu, who was the primary focal point for this conference, to Ruth for her leading role, and to Tarana, who helped to organize the meetings in the margins of the conference. Thank you.
Большое спасибо. На этом наша конференция завершается. Я желаю вам всем хорошего лета. У нас еще целый месяц впереди летнего отдыха. У кого запланирован отдых, еще раз спасибо переводчикам и группам ГИМО, всем подразделениям за оперативное решение вопросов и за прекрасное взаимодействие с Бюро специального представителя и с Министерством иностранных дел. Мы всегда ждем всех участников на наших мероприятиях, очень много. За нашими новостями вы можете следить во всех социальных сетях. И более того, о нашей конференции вчера тоже было очень много информации во всех социальных сетях, в том числе на странице посла Джарбусыновой. Поэтому добро пожаловать на следующее мероприятие. И еще раз большое спасибо за работу. До свидания. Пожалуйста, сдайте наушники и не забудьте свои документы, те, кто пользовался переводом.